Hello and welcome to the Con Couple. I'm Richard,
I'm Caroline.
and we go to a frankly balmy number of cons every year.
I actually am going to agree with you this week. We might go to too many.
Yeah. So, this week we were at Cleveland Fan Expo, and we have thoughts.
Many.
Yeah. I'm kind
So,
of curious to see how long this episode ends up being.
so just a couple brief disclaimers. First off, keep in mind that any con goer's experience is going to be unique and sui generis to them, and cons that we like or really loved might be cons that you hate, or vice versa. So we're just two random people who are talking into microphones, largely so remember all that happens at the various cons we go to, and that's the primary reason we do this podcast. But you don't have to agree with our opinions on anything.
Yep.
And if you had a fantastic time or horrible time this weekend, own that opinion.
Exactly. We are just two people speaking for ourselves, nothing more than that. So,
We want to talk about what Cleveland Fan Expo is, because it is a bigger con, so it is a bit more of a history than some of the smaller ones we go to, and it's a bit more publicly available. I don't know, for instance, what exactly caused Bourbon City Steampunk Con to exist.
Yeah.
Or Concoction, which I think are the two we've reviewed so far.
those are the two episodes we've done so
Yeah.
far, yeah. So, Cleveland Fan Expo is, well, it's a branch of the ever-expanding Fan Expo chain, effectively, of conventions. They've got various other ones that they do throughout the year.
So it and Galaxy Con are the two kind of big cons in Ohio that are corporate run, which means they're generally for profit. Cleveland Fan Expo used to be, I think, Wizard Con, which I think was also a chain at some point, although I'm a bit unclear of the trajectory there. I think that was done before the pandemic. They either bought it or rebranded it. I'm also unclear on how that took place, but this is a big corporate con. They do numbers, they make a lot of money, and they employ a lot of people.
Yeah. So, for reference, last year's Fan Expo hit somewhere in the 20 to 25,000 attendees range, I believe.
That's the number they give, yes.
Yeah.
Obviously, they haven't released numbers for this weekend, but I'd probably guess about the same.
Yeah, I'd say somewhere in the same ballpark, maybe a bit, maybe slightly higher.
Yeah.
But again, we'll talk about our thoughts on that specific element in a little bit. And for anybody who can't tell, we are recording this on our drive home after the con, so it's quite literally Sunday of the convention. As we talk, there are actually. Has the last panel thrown out
I
yet?
think David Tennant probably just threw out as we're talking, because we did leave a little bit early on Sunday, which we will talk about, although we were never probably going to go to that last panel because it was the only thing on, and there were a lot of people there, and that's really not our vibe generally.
Yeah, we tend to prefer slightly smaller things, but we do like going to big cons, because again, the vibes are generally good, and we'll talk about it.
So this is our third year going to Fan Expo, and we've had, I think, a wide variety of experiences each of the 3 years, because the first year we went 2 years ago was one of the first cons we ever went to, and it really made us happy, and we had a lot of fun, and it made us want to go to more and more cons.
Yeah.
And now we go to a lot of cons. So.
And last year was not as good as the first year, but was still pretty good and enjoyable. This year, oh boy.
We'll get into that. Just a brief reminder, because I'm assuming that anyone who listens to this podcast primarily is listening to episodes about the cons that they go to, so I might do the same disclaimers every time. So as a reminder, this is a podcast we record in our car, as I've mentioned every episode. Richard is the one driving, and this is all done with hands-free lapel mics, and we are keeping within state law.
Yep. Any buttons that need pushing, you're going to be the one doing that.
Unless you're pushing my buttons.
Yeah, but that's an entirely separate thing. That's also illegal to do in the car.
That is true.
Definitely counts as distracted driving.
Yeah.
But, yeah. So, should we start by talking about, the venue and all of the kind of big overarching stuff?
Yeah, that's generally how we start.
Yep. So, first things first. The venue for this is the, what's it called? The Hubbard?
I have no idea. I probably should have looked that up. Yeah, it's the major convention center in Cleveland, Ohio. Yeah. So.
And for the most part, I actually quite like it as a convention center, apart from a few issues. One being, I don't think its disability access is great.
No, it has a lot of levels and floors that are hard to get to. and it doesn't really have its own dedicated parking garage. There's just a bunch of parking garages that are kind of miscellaneously around the center that you
Yeah,
can go to.
that was going to be one of the next things I was going to talk about. So if we do that in just a second, sound like a plan?
Okay, I don't know what you want to talk about now.
I was mostly going to talk about the Fan Expo itself doesn't use the entire convention center; it rents out a portion of it. Specifically, the what I would dub the main floor, which it uses for its vendors hall, and then a long-ish corridor that's split over 2 levels, with a bunch of smaller rooms going off it that it uses as panel rooms. And this is going to be something we're going to get into in a bit more detail later. But that gives you kind of a broad overview of how they use the space. So in order to actually get to the con, you basically go in the main entrance, and then you have to go down 2 floors to get to the main floor, for whatever reason. It's I don't really have any major problems with it as a con space, other than the fact that I don't think it's as accessible as it could be. How do you feel on that front?
I'm generally fine if I think venues or the con is using the space terribly well, and I do get the sense that for the size of con that Fan Expo is running, it's probably the only game in town, so to speak. I don't think there's many convention centers in Cleveland that big, so it's what they have to work with. And had they used the space better, I don't think I would fault the con as much for the limitations of the center itself, because it does have a decent chunk of space. There's a lot of stuff laid out there. And it does have elevators that'll get you around, although again, it is quite slow to get down to the bottom floor if you're disabled or unable to use the
Yeah, I did actually notice signs on the lifts that basically said, for accessibility use only. Because again, 20 to 25,000 people at a rough guess at this event this weekend. So yeah, and they set up part of the main floor to be their line, where you get your badges and all of that jazz. And we'll probably talk about that a bit more in detail once we talk about how we did things in chronological order.
Okay.
But the one thing I will say is that once you've got your badge at this con, you do need to tap in and tap out of the con. They've got people manning the pretty much only ways in and out.
Well, sometimes you didn't have to tap out, and sometimes you did. It was a bit confusing.
So the only time we didn't have to tap out was when we left on Friday, and that was after the last thing was kind of done. So I don't think they were bothering at that point because they weren't letting anybody back in.
Yeah, it might have been a head count thing for how many people they want in the space. It's still a bit unclear to me exactly why it existed.
Yeah.
Might also just be record keeping numbers for them of who's there when.
Yeah. Yeah, so, and as we mentioned, the parking this weekend, because it doesn't have a dedicated parking garage, at least not what we've been able to find, the parking this weekend was a bit shaky. Because the last couple of years we've parked at the parking garage that's just across from the main entrance, which does require a walk outside, which if you're carrying a big, heavy, bulky costume and it's windy, it's a little bit of an issue.
Yeah, it's a little bit hard when there's not a connected car park to the venue a lot of the time, so you have to kind of go around and find ones that work. Do you want to talk about some of the problems we had with that now?
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
So the first day we managed to get into that car park across the way without too many problems. Had to drive around a bit to find a space, but again, you turn up at a certain time at a con and you know that's going to happen. Whereas on Saturday and Sunday, there was a massive line to even get into. Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, there was a massive line to even get into that parking lot, so we didn't even bother. We ended up going for a different one that was around the corner.
It was a bit clear what was wrong with it.
Yeah, I also wasn't sure. So it was one of those things that I suspect the parking lot across the way just got completely overwhelmed.
Yeah, it wasn't terribly crowded in the venue because we got there pretty early on Saturday, so I'm still a bit unclear on what was going on. I also think we had trouble getting out the night before. The machine for the car in front of us and us had trouble taking our tickets. So I think that they might have been running into some tech issues with that particular garage. It was taking a decent chunk of time to get out.
Yep.
And it might just be that they were having problems. I also, and we've talked a little bit about this, most of at least the 2 garages we tried near there, both were pay when you go out as opposed to pay when you go in, which I don't think makes sense for a main event like a con. You should just be paying when you go in and then just being able to get out. Because if people arrive at different times. For the most part, people tend to leave at similar times, so it cuts down on congestion if you pay on the way in.
Yeah, which again, especially if you're doing fixed price event parking,
Yeah.
You have limited options there. But we managed to park up okay, and there is enough parking around it. It's just not brilliantly clear where you need to go.
And parking garages do vary. I think some people paid some lots for $20. We managed to find a $10 one. So I think we paid like $32 overall, which for 3 days because we parked at different places.
So yeah, again, we've paid worse for cons.
Yes.
At some point, we will talk about the Columbus Convention Center parking, but it is one of those things that you do need to budget. For a con like this, you do need to think about your parking budget in addition to everything else you're spending.
Especially if you're not staying at a hotel. They did have a couple connected hotels. As I've mentioned in previous episodes of this podcast, we can't stay at hotels because of my disability. And in this particular con, even though it was about a 2-hour drive for us, we chose to just kind of drive back and forth because we know that this con typically has their programming ending at about 8-ish, so we could get home about 10-ish and figured that was probably fine.
Yeah. So, to what degree do we want to complain before we start talking about the overarching, before we start talking about it in chronological order? Because I think at this point we need to talk about some of the organizational issues.
Okay, do you want to do that before we start, or?
I think so.
Okay.
So, as we mentioned, this is a very celebrity-focused con.
And it's worth noting we are not celebrity-focused people when it comes to cons.
Yeah.
We will say hi to them if we happen to pass them, but we're probably never going to send in an autograph line.
No. Yeah, we will quite happily go to a Q&A panel or an interview panel.
If we don't have to wait in line for a ridiculous amount of time.
Yes. But celebrities are not really the big draw for us. And this con increasingly over the last couple of years has got very, very focused on having big celebrities and using them as their primary draw. Last year, Fan Expo had all 4 of the Hobbits from Lord of the Rings, and that was clearly their big draw. This time they had several actors from Supernatural, including Mark Sheppard and Jared Padalecki.
Some people from Smallville.
Some people from Smallville, including Michael Rosenbaum and Tom Welling. And on Sunday, they also had David Tennant, who, if anybody's not aware, was the 10th Doctor at Doctor Who.
They also had some other people as well. Those just seem to be the names of people who were most popular and the biggest draws at the con. But again, we're not celebrity managers, so we're not going to shout out every single celebrity that they had.
Yeah, fair few other people, including some voice actors. And
some people from Avatar The Last Airbender, Dante Bosco, and the actress who played Azula. And
Ray Delisle.
Yes, thank you. Again, I'm not great with names.
Yeah, that's fair. And yeah. So, but the main issue we have with the organization is they were doing something that for us is a major don't do that at a con. They were clearing panel rooms in between panels. They were actively kicking everybody out. Now, the interesting thing is they weren't doing this with every panel room. They were only doing this with their main stage and their, what they describe as theatre number 2.
And it is worth pointing out, while some of those panels definitely were celebrity panels that might have been bigger draws, a lot of them, especially in Theater 2, weren't actually even celebrity panels. They were just panels that they happened to think would be popular, so they put them in panel room 2. That sometimes had maybe 25 to 35 people in them at most, when the room could have held a couple hundred.
Yeah, like they probably had seating capacity for close to 1,000 in main events, probably even more than that.
Yeah.
And Events 2 was probably somewhere in the 500 range at a rough guess.
Yeah. And sometimes we did have that many people in there, but for a lot of the panels, particularly earlier in the day, that were just either panels that were like movie panels on Cleveland or stuff like that, there weren't that many people in the room. So it wasn't really necessary to make people leave the room for another panel, which also didn't have a lot of people in the room.
And the other thing they were doing was queuing systems in order to get into those rooms. And yeah, here's the thing. If your queue has reached the point where it's a fire hazard, you are screwing up badly. And a bunch of these queues were bad enough to be major fire hazards. Like we had blocked corridors.
Yep.
We had things snaking up and down the entire concourse.
And no accessibility line for anyone who can't stand. My disability, as I've mentioned before on this podcast, is invisible. So, like, no one's going to direct me unless I ask for a place I can go, because I can't wait in lines like that. Like, it's just not physically possible for me to do that.
Yep.
So I basically just, and the one time we waited in line, which I think was a mistake, I basically had to stay at the side and kind of be out of the way of the line, and you stood in line for both of us. And we waited for, and we'll talk more about this, far too long for that particular line. And then I just had to hope that I had to like run past people, because I can physically do that. Some people can't, to basically get back in line. And if you were in a wheelchair, that would be even harder, because I can at least walk across the floor at reasonable haste. Imagine if your friend was holding a line for you while you were in a wheelchair off to the side, and you had to like go back up to the front of the line because you couldn't physically be in line.
And I mean, they were also packing people in like sardines in those lines.
Yep.
To try and make sure that, that there wasn't too much space taken up by them. But like, I was starting to get claustrophobic, and that's not something I typically suffer from.
And it's something for which I believe, like, that particularly in hallway spaces, if you can avoid it all, there should not be lines in hallway spaces. It's not safe for anyone. It's not comfortable for anyone. It's a fire hazard to have that many people just kind of standing there. They won't let you sit down typically, which a lot of people need to be able to do, because again, that's a fire hazard.
Yep.
And it's just not feasible for people to be in lines like that in hallway. It's not Disney World or someplace like that where they have design queues that are available. And what that ultimately means is, if you can get people into rooms, which they could do because there were breaks in between panels,
Yep.
they need to be getting people into those rooms as quickly as possible to maintain space in the hallway.
Yeah. Because again, for both main events and room 2, there was a half-hour break between each panel, during which time they cleared everybody out, and then if you were lucky, they let you into the room 10-15 minutes before the panel.
Occasionally they let you in at the time the panel started, which meant the panel automatically started 5 minutes late because they had to spend 5 minutes getting people into the room.
Yep, still don't know whose decision that was, but if you're listening, it was the wrong decision. So yeah, those are two major things that we hate with a fiery passion when cons do.
I will say, if they do those things in conjunction, like this con does, that does put the con pretty high on the we're probably not going to come back to this con list because I don't feel safe. It doesn't work for my disability. It's not fun, and it's just largely pointless.
Yeah. And
I also found the particular way that they went about getting people out of rooms who were staying in the rooms to be uncomfortable for pretty much everyone involved.
Yeah, they were having their volunteers actually go up to people and say
individually,
and say, oh, you need to leave this room now.
Which just creates a confrontational situation between a volunteer who might not have feel comfortable doing that, and likely, because again, the last people in rooms are largely disabled people who are already being told a lot of the time where to go and what to do and how to do it in ways that are really frustrating. And it's not fair to either of those groups.
Yeah. So that kind of put a pretty big sour on today's experiences for us, I think.
In the last couple days.
Yeah.
The other thing that I think is worth mentioning before we dive into specifically what we did is their poor use of space.
Jeez, yes. Yeah, their use of space was really bad this year.
Even more so than usual. They've always done a bit of weird stuff with space that I have found weird. Like, they'll just have events in hallways a lot of the time. Like, last year they had Cirque du Soleil performers in hallways, and I'm just like, it's not a safe place to watch a Cirque du Soleil performance at all.
Yeah. This year they had the kids zone in a hallway.
They also had a dance party on the main floor of the convention, which on Saturday, when you have 20,000 people, is largely non-traversable. And they had people, like, I think, trying to dance in one corner of it or host a dance party. That's not remotely doable.
No. And the thing is, as I mentioned previously, they aren't using the whole convention space.
There are open rooms.
There are open rooms. There is a lot more of that convention space that they weren't using. And frankly, they should have been. Because this is not a con that's lacking for money. They could afford to rent out more of the space. And next year, I think they should.
Yeah.
because nothing else. It's not like they had a competing event that was using that space. There was nothing else at that convention center this weekend other than this.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like at this point they should be renting out more of the space and using more of the space because they have enough people coming that they need to do that.
It's also worth noting they have 5 or 6 separate lounge spaces. They have a lounge space. They have 2 tiers of VIPs. So they have a lounge space for their ultra VIPs and their, I guess, normal VIPs, which are just 2 rooms next to each other.
Yep.
Although they cap the level of VIP tickets such that I think, especially for the ultra VIPs, I don't even think that there's enough tickets they sell at that level for all of them to even take up all the seats in that room, even if they were all in it at the same time.
Yeah.
Like, it's not possible.
Yeah. You know, they had their board game room, which was kind of off to the side and, you know, not very big.
Mm-hmm.
That was completely full at least part of Saturday, but other than that, we did manage to get into it a couple of times.
I will say we typically, as we mentioned last episode, don't do board games at non-board gaming conventions or RPG games just because they take up so much of your con day that we don't tend to like doing them unless we're at a con that's devoted for that. But I do think that there's a problem with them generally because I've noticed them at a lot of cons, and this is not unique to Fan Expo. How you sign up for them on most con websites is just completely opaque. Like, it's not clear how you sign up for any of those events, where you go, if it's just going to be at the con, can you do it in advance, do you email somebody? They just have it kind of listed as something you can do, sign up to do an RPG. And it's completely unclear how you sign up for it.
Yeah, at this particular con, while we had some time to kill, so we went to the board game room to play some board games. We heard the guy running it say probably a dozen times some variation of, yes, this is where the D&D is taking place, it's full. Mm-hmm. Because it was one of those things that obviously a D&D game has a max player size of what, like half a dozen players, give or take? Mm-hmm. And they clearly advertised that there was going to be D&D in some capacity, but they'd also not advertised that you needed to sign up for it in advance, which meant that people who wanted to just kind of turn up and play D&D were completely out of luck.
And I want to emphasize that might not necessarily be the person who's running those games' fault. That might have been how the website was put together or some communication between them and the venue, because that board game hall, like most board game halls, are typically run by like people who are otherwise outside the con who are local.
Yeah.
We have met that person before at other cons. They seem very nice and competent at their job, so I don't think this was on them.
No, I don't think that was on them at all. Again, like, the one thing I really want to say about this con is the actual panels and events we went to, for the most part, were good.
And likewise, the fans who attend Fan Expo are fantastic. That's why we've gone the last 2 years.
Yeah.
Because the atmosphere and the encouragement of all the people who are attending, they're just so absolutely nice.
Yeah, they are just great, great people. All of the problems we had this weekend were because of a few high-level decisions that just made the con suck for us.
And again, we do have particular needs, and I do recognize that, but some of these decisions we know were affecting other people because we were talking to them about it, and we know that frustration was not just us, it was also other people.
Yeah.
And for us, that frustration, I think, is high enough that we're seriously considering not attending anymore.
Yeah. So, should we get on to chronology?
Yes. Do you want to go over the other lounge spaces? Or do you
want to go the other, like, multiple lounge spaces. So, in terms of the room setup, they had their main events, their second stage, and then they had, I think, 3 panel rooms, give or take.
So they had 2 panel rooms, because the back section has an upper and lower level. There were 2 smaller panel rooms on the upper level, main events, and the second theater, the other big event space, was on the lower level. There was one like tiny panel room next to those 2 that we didn't go into just because some of the events we had were in that one.
Yep, that was the anime room specifically.
Well, there was another tiny theater between the anime room and that.
Oh, yeah, there was.
Which, again, we didn't go into. There was also an anime room that I think also had events, but was also meant to be an anime lounge. And then there was a family center lounge, there was a quiet lounge, and there was a cosplay lounge.
And a book lounge.
And a book lounge.
And a workshop lounge.
And a workshop lounge, I do think that was actually holding events. And all of these rooms did hold, like, some event or another over the weekend.
Yep.
But they were also lounge spaces at the same time, which was kind of awkward because they were meant to have this dualistic function, and it was very confusing at times because there were clearly people in those rooms who were just there to like hang out.
Yep.
At the same time, people were like trying to do a very specific thing, and it was quite confusing.
There's also the bingo hall.
Yeah. Which we'll talk about later.
Yeah.
This was something they added last year. It's basically a place where you can like play bingo and phone app games and win prizes.
Yeah. And that was running basically all weekend.
Yeah.
And they were also using Ballroom A as a. They labeled it a food court. What they meant was there were a bunch of tables in there that you could theoretically sit down at, and like what looked to be one hot dog stand. I would not describe that as a food court.
Yeah, there was not a lot of food.
There was a giant line for it at one point.
Yeah. I think there were 2 places where you could get food that wasn't like being sold by one of the vendors' tables.
Yeah.
And both of them were pretty pricey.
Yeah.
And I don't think you tried food.
I did not. The availability of food at this con was not good. Because I don't feel like paying $16 for some chicken tenders and some fries.
I will say to the con's credit, they do allow you to bring outside food in. They don't do any sort of badge check or stuff like that, which I do appreciate, particularly at a larger con.
Yeah.
Because I, as a person who can only eat very specific things, pretty much can't eat any food court food. I get very resentful when cons do not allow you to bring in outside food, because again, I can't eat anything that's not outside food. And I shouldn't have to bring a doctor's note to a con to verify that I'm allowed to have a sandwich.
Yeah. So yeah. But yeah, the availability of food wasn't great. They had a few stalls inside the vendors hall that were serving food, but again, it was extremely pricey. And if you just wanted to grab a Coke, they did have like an on-site little store, which was very, very expensive. Had fun paying $5 for a Coke.
Yep. So I think we mostly grabbed food on the way home,
Yep.
which worked a little bit for us. And they do allow outside food, which again is one point in their favor. I will take any con that doesn't do a bag check, because a bag check is also something that's going to quickly put a con on my no list, because one, it bogs a whole line of people trying to enter, particularly at a big con down. It makes it take way too long. And 2, just let people bring in the stuff that they want. A lot of people can't eat your overpriced con food, so.
Yeah. Which again, so if you decide to attend this event next year, bring some sodas.
Yeah, that's a recommendation.
Yeah. Which again, we generally tend to do, to most cons. So, chronology, or is there anything else we want to complain about first?
I think we can talk about the vendors hall once we get into the building, so
Yeah.
let's maybe start with chronology now.
Yeah. So,
and as I've mentioned before, with any con, particularly one this big, we can't do everything at the con, so we're not going to be able to review like absolutely everything that happened. But we'll talk about what we did and what we liked.
Yep.
And did not like.
Yeah. So, first up, we arrived, we got parked up, as we mentioned, and we walked over. Do we want to talk about what we were wearing on day one?
I think we were wearing Fandom and Christine on day one, so I was wearing a ball gown that was kind of glittery.
Yep.
One of my less poofy ball gowns, actually.
Yep.
I could actually walk in that one, and you were wearing a Phantom mask.
Yes, I was wearing the tux I got married in and a Phantom mask.
And we did have to work on Friday, so we did come down a little bit later in the day, but we were still before people were out of work.
Yep.
And I would say, interestingly, Friday was actually their most quiet day of the con. Typically, at most cons, it's Sunday, but this time it was Friday.
It was.
And
again,
part thanks to David Tennant, which we can talk more about.
We will talk about that in detail when we get to Sunday, I think. So, again, parked up, fine, not too problematic. Got into the con. Because they haven't changed their setup in the last few years, we kind of knew exactly where we were going. So down a couple of flights of stairs into the line to get our badges.
That was short at that point.
Yep.
I did not see it be long all weekend. I will say their check-in system does tend to be incredibly efficient.
Yeah, they had that pretty much handled. It was walk up, scan the QR code, hand over the badge.
Then some weirdness happens, though, that is kind of a bit confusing.
Yeah, so once you've got your badge, you have to activate your badge.
So you basically awkwardly go over to this side because there's a longer entrance for people who need to get lanyards. So there's like a long hallway you can go down. That gives you an access code, and then you have to like go and fill out a bunch of personal information to activate your badge and assign your name to the badge.
Yeah, you scan a QR code on the back of the badge. It's also got and then it says, type in your, activation number. So you do that, you fill in your name, email address, all of that nonsense, and then they confirm your email address by sending you an email and having you check that.
Which I suppose probably does make the main line shorter because all the like hullabaloo about like attaching your badge to a person is something you just do on your own time, which means that it's presumably faster than if the employee did it. But I'm also a bit confused on why you need to do that at all. Like once you pick up your tickets, that feels like you don't really need to do much more than that. So I don't know what the registering your badge to a particular person actually does.
I mean, it's so that they've got your email address and they know your email address is live.
I suppose that's probably true because they do send a lot of promotional material.
Yep. Because again, they've got a lot of other events to advertise. You know, they want to make sure you know, months in advance who's been confirmed for this con. I've been getting emails about Jared Padalecki being in this con for like 6 months.
That's true, I have to. I don't want to say that that's the only reason I don't claim to know. I will say it is kind of mildly annoying to just kind of sit there in a hallway with, 100 other people trying to fill out this information and have to do this like station thing. I would rather just scan the QR code, get my badge, get my lanyard, and go in because that part of the process they have down. Like It's fast.
It is. And again, granted, we were there at a time before the real heave started, but even so, it was efficient. I will give them credit for that.
And I will also give them one credit on accessibility. They did have a disability access line. I did not try to get my tickets through that line, so I don't know if you could. I typically only try to do that if a line's not moving quickly enough that I have to spend 5 or 10 or more minutes standing in it. I really didn't at this one, so I didn't bother. But they had an access line, and I appreciated that fact.
Yeah. And again, kudos to you for having that. That was a good thing that you should have had, and you did.
Before you ask, we have asked about getting more inclusive access for me so I wouldn't have to wait in lines in the past at Cleveland Fan Expo, and I've generally been told that they couldn't accommodate that, so I didn't ask this year.
Yeah. So getting in, pretty straightforward. Once you've got your badge, you basically go in, you get tapped in, and then you're onto the floor. And the floor was fine. That was pretty much when we went into the vendors hall.
Yep, which is pretty much the only time we spent any significant amount of time in the vendors hall this weekend because it was the time when it was the least crowded.
Yep.
And the vendors hall at Cleveland Fan Expo is massive. It's probably the most massive of any cons we go to.
Origins might top it.
Origins might top it, but they do have a lot of gaming spaces as well, so it's hard to say. But it is a very big vendors hall.
Yeah.
It is probably as big as the rest of the con space combined.
Oh, it's twice the size of the rest of the con space combined, easily.
If you're counting the celebrity autograph area, which is in the back of the vendors hall.
Yeah, I would count that. So, I'll say this: they set it up pretty logically and efficiently. Bunch of rows. Everything kind of racked up sensibly. Just about enough room to maneuver in between booths, I would say.
Mm.
Whoever's responsible for the actual logistics of how the vendors hall is set up does do a very good job of it.
Mm.
And I suspect that's probably one of the biggest focuses of this con, because this con is very vendors hall focused. They want you and they expect you to turn up with the intention to shop.
Yeah. Which we typically don't. Again, we'll buy stuff that's artisanal. In this case, we did get a very cute Cthulhu plush that is handmade by a local vendor whose name I forgot. But if you see a handcrafted local plush at a con, I highly recommend it.
Yep, I would agree. And we deliberately got that on day one, and I'm glad we did, because when we did manage to wander past them again on Sunday, about half their stuff had sold. So I'm glad of that. They, this Cthulhu, is absolutely adorable, and I'm glad we got it.
And I was glad that we were able to get some shopping in, but the main vendors hall was not accessible to me in a ball gown pretty much all weekend. And I would also be interested to see how accessible it was to people in wheelchairs and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But it's pretty, both because I'm wearing a ball gown a lot and because of my disability. The vendors hall is just generally not accessible to me at that con, but that's something I knew going in.
Yeah.
We've gone the last 2 years. We knew at least on Saturday it was going to be completely inaccessible to me, and we were prepared for that. Sunday I was a bit surprised by. I was surprised at how crowded it was on Sunday, but
which again, we'll get into our thoughts on the reasons for that and various other bits and bobs. So, what was the first panel we went to? Oh yeah, so we wandered the vendors hall for a little bit because we'd arrived, 30, 40 minutes before the first panel we really wanted to go to.
Yep.
And we also kind of took a little tour through the celebrity area, which we like to wander through, even if we don't actually like. We have no desire to get celebrity autographs.
Well, it's
It's
also
just not a
something
thing that interests
that
us.
I've been thinking more about as we talk more about accessibility and cons, because every celebrity focused con I see does it this particular way, where it's just like these incredibly narrow, winding rows of tape that are just on the floor that are in front of the celebrity that you can like get in to go meet the celebrity. And there's so many other ways you could do that that would be more accessible to both the celebrity and the fans. In this particular con's case, there were just empty rooms at this con. You could put the celebrities in them. Like, they're incredibly famous names. People would know how to find them if they were looking for them and wanted an autograph. And you could put them in a place where, like, people could sit down and wait for their number to be called or something like that that would be a little bit more friendly to people. It might actually lead to the celebrities actually making more money as opposed to less, because they could have more fans who wouldn't bulk at an incredibly long line.
And again, they were packing them in like sardines
Yep.
for various points. So
And I will say another thing that is not just a problem with Fan Expo generally, but with most cons, is generally photo ops and stuff like that. If you pay for them separately in advance, you can find that pricing on the website. But just for like autographs or selfies, those are not located anywhere. You just kind of have to go up and see, and you typically can't even see from the end of the line how much you're going to be paying till you get up front, which is a large part of the reason why I never even bother, is just because I don't even know really what I'm committing to when I get in line.
Because again, some of them are expensive. Like I'm not going to name any names, but I saw at least one celebrity this weekend charging $100 for a signature.
Mm-hmm. Which I do support celebrities being able to make their own pricing with that, or whatever pricing their agents say. That's absolutely fine, but that should be transparent to people who are going to the con what those celebrities are going to be charging. They shouldn't get there and be disappointed that they can't get, I'm not going to say the name, but John Smith's autograph because that person is out of their price range. That shouldn't be a disappointment that a fan should have to face. They should be able to make that decision in terms of whether or not the celebrity is going to be in their price range before they go to the con.
Yeah. Which again, that's an issue about transparency. And to be fair, the con probably doesn't know what any given celebrity is planning to charge until they get there.
Which is true, but it is something they could verify and say that they want put on their website.
Yeah.
But I will say that that problem is not exclusive to Fan Expo. Pretty much all celebrity-focused cons have that problem.
Yeah, they do.
But again, we don't typically wait in celebrity lines for kind of all the reasons we just mentioned. They're inaccessible, you can't tell the prices, and we really don't care that much about meeting celebrities.
Yeah. Like again, I'll happily go to a celebrity panel, see them talk on stage, but we will get into the specifics of that. So yeah, so again, wandered the vendors hall for a bit, bought ourselves an adorable Cthulhu plush, and then
You forgot what we did next.
no, I remember what the first panel was. The first panel was the Avatar: The Last Airbender crew.
Yeah, it was still fairly early on that weekend, and because of that, it wasn't really that crowded. And for this panel, we got there like 30 minutes early, and they just straight up let us into the room.
Yep.
Which was great. It was the only time they did that all weekend. Apparently, they decided that was a horrible thing to do, despite the fact that everyone liked it.
Yep, that worked great. And again, the only thing that when we got let in at that time was we were basically told front 2 rows for VIPs only. We went, okay.
That was fine. They did have a person saying that continuously as people walked into the room. They also had them labeled on the seats. I feel like them just being labeled as the seats would have been fine. Well, at the very least, it would have been fine if it was properly communicated to everyone in the room, which I'm not sure it was.
I'm not sure it was, because, so we loitered for a bit, sat around playing on our phones and all that jazz, and then, we got to the point where we were like, I don't know, a couple of minutes out from when the panel was due to start, and the moderator came on stage.
And was confused as to why no one was sitting in the first 2 rows.
Yeah, she basically told everybody to move up.
And that time it was like a free-for-all. Like, people, we were happy with our seats, which were just, a place that was accessible for me. I was happy we weren't moving.
Yep.
But, it was complete chaos in that room for 2 or 3 minutes as everyone scrambled into the first 2 rows.
Yeah, that was messy.
Yeah.
Which, again, I don't know if she just wasn't told that the front 2 rows was supposed to be VIP exclusive seats, or...
Well, she did that again later that weekend, too, where she asked people to move up. I think it was the same person.
That was the same person.
So I don't know if, they just decided it would be a rule that if the VIPs were VIP seats weren't taken 5 minutes to start time, they would have people move up. But they could have also communicated that better because it was just a confusing free-for-all for everyone, which also is unfair to, again, people who get there early and need accessible seating probably couldn't move to the front seats fast enough for other groups.
So yeah. So that first panel was 3 particular people from Last Airbender, specifically the performers who played Zuko, Azula, and Toph.
Yes.
And I always forget Toph was played by an actual child.
Yep.
Because it's 20 years since they made the show, she's not a child anymore.
Yeah,
but
she's basically our age now.
Yep. But again, that was a good panel. I enjoyed it. They have good chemistry with each other because they've known each other forever. Which again, but the one thing I will say is,
and this was a problem all weekend.
They, despite being nominally a Q&A panel, they didn't let a single audience question out.
No, they apparently asked for questions in advance, presumably on their website, which meant just anyone could ask questions. And this was a problem all weekend because if you just ask the Fan Expo community, which has demographics in multiple cities across the US and Canada, to ask questions, then you're going to likely get a bunch of questions from people who aren't even at the con and can't hear the answers to those questions, which is just less satisfying generally.
Yep.
And I get the need to want to, vet the questions, but that's actually not that hard to do. We've been to plenty of audience Q&A panels. Maybe once in 100 questions, somebody will ask an inappropriate question, but the actor just, comes up with a silly answer to that question, and then we all move on and laugh at it.
Yeah. Or they just roll past it and just kind of ignore it.
Yeah.
There are plenty of ways to handle a con-goer asking an inappropriate question.
But it's an incredibly rare occurrence to begin with. There's also, I guess, a worry about people rambling, but at the one panel later that we'll talk about in a second that had active questions and Q&As, no one rambled. They gave a line about how they knew that particular person and then asked their question. It took about the amount of time that it should. It was great.
Yep. But yeah, so no fan questions of that one, just the moderator asking them stuff. And again, they have good stage presence. I'm pretty sure Grey Delisle kept going off script.
Yep.
Because telling it, for a very family-friendly con.
There was a lot of cursing in the celebrity panels for a family-friendly con. I think pretty much only Oliver and James Phelps were the ones who did not break the no cursing rule.
Yep. Which was great. She was telling, interesting stories about her youth, which I'm not going to relay, but I suspect she had an interesting set of teenage years.
But I did find it interesting that the scripts that they were, because the questions the moderator was asking were clearly all pre-scripted, and I think throughout the weekend the celebrities were getting kind of bored by the questions because they kept going pretty far off script.
Yep.
To answer or just talk about the things that they wanted to talk about, which was kind of great. So
yeah. But yeah, so again, that was a perfectly good panel, perfectly fine way to start off the con. And yeah, it's hilarious that Dante Bosco somehow still sounds like that. That guy can still do the voice of a slightly whiny teenager, despite the fact he's 40 plus now.
And he wasn't. Neither him nor the Azula's actor. Sorry, again, I'm not great with names.
Grey Delisle.
Were children when the show came out, so they obviously are bit more character voices. Dante just has one voice, and Azula's voice actor again
has goddamn millions.
Yeah, and she did most of them in the panel, which was great.
Yeah, she did quite a few of the classic Azula lines, and got a good reaction out of the crowd at every one of them. And again, they were good panelists, and this is one thing I do want to say specifically. All of the people doing panels, all of the celebrities, all of the panelists, almost all of the panelists this weekend were very, very good. They cared. They were trying their best to make this a good experience for the people.
And sometimes they were actively working against conditions that were not great. That's happened quite a few times, both with celebrities and just with individual panelists.
Yep.
Because the celebrities, I think, were given almost too much sideboarding because they're everything they had was scripted, and they were meant to get these very canned answers that they clearly didn't want to give.
Yep.
And with the non-celebrity panels, they weren't given any help whatsoever. They were just kind of put in a room, and there was not even a moderator for the door or anyone to help with technology half the time.
Yep.
For one panel, they actually had to go get somebody to fix the computer because there was no one there to make sure that they were set up.
So yeah. So what did we do after that? Was that the first sketch duel?
That was the first sketch duel with, I do have the names up, so I'm going to say them, Scott Hanna and Matt Harak. I'm not sure if I'm saying your last name correct, Matt. Sorry, but I doubt you're listening to this.
That's fair. And if you've never been to it, a sketch duel is a pretty simple concept. You get a couple of professional artists, sometimes up to three. They will take audience suggestions and they will draw something. And they've got the length of the panel, typically 45 minutes to an hour. All the panels at this con were 45 minutes, including all the celebrity ones.
And our first Fan Expo picture that you see up there, we got effectively by going to a sketch duel at our first Fan Expo con. Agnes G, I'm not going to say her full last name because it's something like Burkowski. It's one of those very long G names.
Yeah.
Did that, and we met her at a sketch duel.
We did.
And she was really great. And we didn't obviously win that picture of us at a sketch duel because you can't request anything that specific, but we did pay her for that later that same day at the con.
Yep.
And it's still one of my favorite pieces of art ever.
Oh, absolutely.
So this sketch duel was also interesting because generally sketch duels have audience suggestions. With this sketch duel, they just decided to draw as many pictures as they possibly could in an hour so they could give as much stuff away to fans for free as possible, which was awesome.
Yeah, I think they were giving out 5 or 6 prizes at the end.
Yeah.
Which again, 2 artists. So they did great there. Oh dear.
So we're coming up to a bit of traffic. We can see it. I'll take over talking a little bit while Richard's driving.
Yeah.
So
Trying to figure out.
I think you need to get out of this lane.
Yeah, I think I do as well. I'm just trying to figure out what lane is even closed.
I'm pretty sure it's the lane you're in.
Yeah.
This is very exciting, riveting stuff.
Exactly. Yeah, you were saying?
So while they draw, you ask them questions. It's typically the same general question. What's your favorite thing to draw? What's your hardest thing to draw? How'd you get started drawing? All that jazz. But it's fun to listen to them talk, and sometimes they do have some behind-the-scenes stories of comics and stuff like that if you're particularly interested. And generally just has a panel that's pretty low-key if you want to kill an hour. You can never go wrong with a sketch duel panel there. You get artists drawing fun, professional art. You can make zany suggestions if you want. They don't have to take them if it's too zany for them. I think we had Deadpool. Was it the Punisher eating an ice cream cone at this panel? It was
the Punisher eating an ice cream cone.
Which was, a pretty fun one. And then at the end, they raffle them off. Depending on how many people are in the room, your odds of winning may be good or bad, but that's not really the point. It's just fun to kind of go and see these artists battle it out.
Yeah.
And that was a pretty basic panel. I will say that the panel rooms in the 2 smaller theaters at this con had some pretty weird chair layouts. The room we were in particular, Theater 4, just because it's up on the schedule right now, the seats were very close to the stage. There was not a lot of legroom between them and the stage. The aisle was very narrow, and the room in general was very not wheelchair accessible. It was probably the least wheelchair accessible of any of the rooms we were in.
Yeah.
Because the aisle was narrow. There wasn't really a place to sit in the front. It wasn't a really friendly room. I did not like it when we were in that room in terms of the rooms. Also, the chairs were extremely uncomfortable.
Yeah, the chairs at this con kind of sucked, which is not the con's fault.
No, it's not. They're provided
Those are the chairs
chairs.
The venue has.
They were not comfortable all weekend. I was in pain at some points.
I mean, you were wearing the candy skirt on day 2. Yeah. But anyway. Yeah, so the next... so again, the sketch duel was great. They're rarely my favorite things at cons, but I don't think we've been to one that we didn't enjoy at least somewhat. They are just good, enjoyable, solid con experiences. And if you happen to win a piece of art that you absolutely adore, it is a really great experience. So, and again, the organization on that was actually pretty good. They just had somebody giving out raffle tickets at the door.
Yep.
So you went in, you got a raffle ticket.
And a couple people left early. They gave their raffle tickets back. So, and sometimes people weren't in the room, so they just called new names. We didn't wind up winning anything, but none of those pieces of art I was in love with. So I was happy that they went to people who did.
Yeah, exactly.
So after that was probably we've been to this panel before, and it's one of our favorites generally. It is particular, I think, to the Fan Expo scene, unfortunately, which means we might not see it again for a while, because this works with somebody who works with them.
Yeah.
But this is Bootleg Safari.
Yeah, which is run by Aaron Reynolds, and if you've ever seen either Effin' Birds or Swear Trek, he's the guy behind those.
His guest for this was Stephanie Williams, who is an amazing comic book artist who is doing the Amazonians right now. She was great comedic timing. I really liked her as a panel guest.
Yeah. And the principle of Bootleg Safari is basically, there's a lot of weird knockoff stuff out there. Things that, clearly are designed to trick grandparents who've been asked to buy a gift for their kid, and they think they're getting the real thing, and they're not. So, for example, what was it? famous lasagna-eating cat,
Yep.
who's definitely not Garfield, and who looks like he's been through like the worst drug overdose ever. Um, and things like that. So it's a very fun, very silly panel where they just show you a bunch of weird knockoff stuff that they found.
Yeah, and typically superheroes that are like very poorly drawn or have the wrong color schemes, very creepy looking stuffed animals. A couple of videos that are meant to be like, I think the one they did this time was a knockoff of Cars that was horrifying.
Yeah, if you've ever seen the famous knockoff of Ratatouille, yeah, the same company also made a knockoff of Cars. Apparently, they made at least 3 of them because they were showing clips from the third one. It was bad, guys.
It was bad and hilarious. And I will say this about Aaron Reynolds: he is an amazing panel host because he encourages audience participation. He takes your questions, he lets people shout out stuff, and he makes everyone in that room feel like they're important and special. And he's just great at that.
Like, even when you're making a stupid nitpicky point, he will like acknowledge the point, link it back to what you've been talking about, and move on. Like,
he makes everyone in that room feel like they're comfortable and having a great time. So I honestly, cons, if any con has Aaron Reynolds sign up to do something, just let him do whatever he wants. He's going to be great at it.
Yeah, I would agree. He did a fantastic job.
And Stephanie Williams is also incredible. But she does not, I think she's more of a guest than an actual panel speaker. But I do want to read her comics. They look really cool.
Because again, I think it's a case of, the bootleg safari is this thing that Aaron Reynolds loves to do, and he gets a guest on it each time he does it.
And he generally is in cons in Canada because he is Canadian. It might only be in cons in Canada soon.
Yeah. Ugh.
We won't talk about politics more than we have to on this podcast that no one listens to.
Yep. So yeah, but no. So that panel was absolutely great. Loved it. Absolute hoot as it was. Again, we've seen it one time before, and it was a hoot then. It was a hoot now.
Yep, highly recommend it.
Yeah.
I will say panel times at this particular con were 45 minutes long, like all of them. There were a few exceptions. I think the David Tennant panel we didn't go to was a little bit longer.
Pretty sure it's still 45 minutes.
I thought I remembered it being longer, but I'll check when we get to the Sunday's calendar.
Yeah.
But it's a bit tight for me. For some panels, they're the right length for 45 minutes, but most panels at least have 50-minute blocks.
Yeah. Generally, cons will give everything an hour time block, but you are supposed to knock off about 5 to 10 minutes early
to let the next panel set up, which I think is fair. I do like that you leave some time in the schedule to set up panels and tear down. Most don't need a lot, but 5 minutes on either end just helps people get in and out of the room without having to panic.
Yeah.
The other thing about this con, and this relates because we went to the Adam Savage panel, which had already started after this one, is they don't have like hour scheduling blocks. Like, stuff's just kind of weirdly timed at this con to start at weird times, and it's not like you just have you have the 3-hour block, then the 4-hour block, then the 5-hour block you would typically see. For some panels, they're starting at 5. For others, they're starting at 5:40. And others are starting at 6:45, and they don't match up very clearly if you want to go from a smaller panel to a larger panel, which makes it hard to kind of plan. Because a lot of times, something will have started 15 minutes after your panel ended, and it doesn't really feel like there's a lot of need to do that, given how much limited the schedule is, because there's only about 4 or 5 things going on at once for a con of 20,000 people.
Yeah, I would have just said everything is starting at the top of an hour and ending at the top of the next hour. But...
yeah, or ending 15 minutes before, so at the 45-minute mark.
Yeah.
If you wanted to do it that way.
So the next thing we did was we went into the back of the Adam Savage panel, and he was the one who was not moderated.
Yeah, and we do think that was a request on his part because everything else had a very similar format, and we can't think of another reason why his panel deviated other than he said he wanted to field audience questions.
Yeah.
Because he was pretty much, we did get in the room late, so I don't know how the panel started, but he was definitely fielding audience questions and seemed like he did that pretty much for the entire 45-minute block, which was awesome.
Yeah.
Because all of the audience asked great questions. If a question was a question he heard a couple times before, like what was your favorite myth to bust or something like that, he just found a way to tell it into a story that maybe some people hadn't heard before. Yeah. And that was great.
Yeah, that was really, really good to see.
And he had amazing energy on stage.
He did. And the other thing was, as we mentioned before, he was the panelist where a lot of people were coming up saying what Mythbusters meant to them or what his current work meant to them, and then asking their question. And nobody overran their time. Nobody was like waffling for ages. One guy came all the way from Sweden for this.
Yeah, and we got to hear about that. Somebody else said how they became a scientist because they watched Mythbusters as a kid, and that's awesome.
Yeah.
And I like hearing those stories, and I think Adam Savage liked those genuine moments of connection. And again, it wasn't anyone like rambling for an hour telling their life story. They just gave a sentence about how they knew Adam Savage, and then they asked their question.
Yeah, which is kind of all that needed to be, and that was absolutely fine. And I think that was easily our favorite celebrity panel of the weekend, not because he was our favorite celebrity.
Yeah, you've never seen Mythbusters.
Nope. Again, it never really made it over to the UK.
Oh, the accent's real, by the way.
Yes, again, hi, I'm actually British. But yeah, so Mythbusters never made it over, and so the only thing I've seen Adam Savage on, or seen is the wrong phrase, is the podcast Lateral, where he was a guest in one episode. And that was, he was fine, but my brain doesn't pick him out from all of the other guests that have been on that, because I don't have that connection to the thing that he's most famous for. And that's not a knock on Mythbusters. That's just a, it never made it over to where I lived at the time.
Yeah. So yeah, that was a really fun panel to go to. And as we mentioned before, the celebrities I think were fantastic this weekend. Their stage presence was great. They clearly wanted to be there. It's pretty easy to look at celebrities who do these types of things as a cash grab, but I legitimately felt like all of the celebrities we at least saw seemed excited to be there and really wanted to interact with their fans, not just make money as quickly as possible.
Yeah. Which I did very much like and appreciate.
So after that, we went, or attempted to go, it was about 8, to Comics and Cocktails, which is an event we loved last year, which is basically, you basically get in a room with a bunch of comics and talk to them and hang out with other con goers and drink and get like free stuff.
Yeah.
It was a pretty nice, just kind of social hour last year at the con. This year at the con, it didn't quite work as an event.
Yeah. So, I think what we need to do is kind of talk about that in some detail.
But we're getting pizza.
Yep.
And you're lost.
And I'm lost, so I need to plug in the, I need to plug in the pizza place into the sat nav. So I'm going to pause this. We also need to get some petrol.
Yeah, so we'll do all that, then we'll come back after we eat and stuff.
So see you in a moment.
Okay.
And we have returned from the important job of getting dinner for the evening.
Yay, we have pizza. That makes things better.
It does. We also have fuel. That's also important.
Yeah. Probably could have made it home on, like, what? Less than a, like...
We have... The car theoretically could do about 50 more miles, and we're further than that from home. So we would have run out if we didn't do that.
I don't know. You could have put it to the test.
Yeah, maybe.
Do you want to explain what went weird with Comics and Cocktails?
Yeah, so Comics and Cocktails was normally being held in one of the lounges. Which one was it?
Friend-verse lounge. It seemed like the family lounge again. There were a lot of lounges.
Yeah. But we kind of turned up and there was no sign of what I would call that event.
There was a cart serving drinks in the hallway, which there was last year. You had to go out of the room to get drinks, but like was in a lounge area that like was devoted to that. This like had gaming laptops or like computers in the back that wasn't very well advertised at all for I guess people who wanted to play video games at a con, which some cons do have, but this one was not advertising in any way, and no one was using like a board with a bunch of very weird debates, like were Ross and Rachel on a blank, where you could like put stickers on. There was like a coloring area for kids. It was a very confused event, and it's also confusing why they had an alcoholic event in a space that was clearly at least partially designed for children.
Yeah, like again, just a lot of very weird use of space at this con, which again I think could be alleviated if they,
used more space.
Yeah.
Like we had to double check to make sure the event was even listed as being in that room, because again, it was a room for kids to do arts and crafts, which didn't seem like a room where you would hold a cocktail party.
Yeah. So we kind of attempted to go to that, didn't have much luck, so we then left, realized at this point that the entire rest of the con was throwing out because the vendors hall had just closed, and we kind of didn't want to be in the massive scrum to get out. And so we went back in to try and see if the event was on, and it clearly wasn't. It was 10 minutes after it was supposed to start, so we just kind of left.
Yeah, again, we had a 2-hour drive back home, so we decided basically we didn't want to kind of stay around to find out, although we did really enjoy it last year, but it didn't seem to be very well organized this year, and we were kind of tired. I will say, though, in retrospect, I do think Friday was probably our best day in terms of like consistency and fun for the con. It was the one day I had the like happy con high when we left because I
Yeah.
enjoyed most of the events we were at. And I don't think it's a coincidence that the day that was the best con day for me was also the day when it was the least crowded.
Yeah. So we went home, we pet our dog, we did all of that, good stuff.
Sleeping and all that jazz.
Yep.
And we
then,
wanted to get up fairly early the next morning, so I think we got up at 7-ish, which is, again, early by con standards.
Yeah, very early by con standards. So we got up, you got ready, I loaded up the car. And what were our outfits on Saturday?
I was doing the candy skirt, which is about a 40-pound skirt around my waist that is bedazzled jewels.
Yeah, while I was in my Wonka costume. So purple top hat, purple vest, long kind of slightly steampunky coat. And again, one of the reasons that we wanted to do that particular outfit at this con is that children adore it.
Yeah.
So it's a very good costume to wear at a family-friendly con.
Yeah. Although it's not something you can wear on the main floor because of how crowded it gets. But I expected that, and that's something that I think is not a large criticism for this con.
No, that's something we knew going in, was that after a certain time on Saturday, we were not getting onto the vendor's floor.
No.
Just at all. Because again, it's hard enough navigating it generally. Once we factor in your disability and the size of the outfits you like to wear to cons, it becomes completely impractical.
Yeah. But that's fine because we didn't want to do anything with the celebrities and like getting autographs anyway. So we at least had prepared and we're managing that.
Yeah.
So we got to the con. We already had bought our tickets. There still wasn't a large line. The only real issue we had getting in was just the traffic because that one garage was blocked off. We also did have problems, as we mentioned before, getting out of that garage the night before.
Yes.
So that's, I think, the point when we wrote off that garage as like a place and kind of pivoted to go to this like second garage, which turned out to be cheaper anyway.
Yep.
It was slightly further away from the venue, but not by much. Maybe we had to walk like a block.
Yep. So that honestly wasn't bad, but again, like finding that was more a matter of luck than anything else. So yeah, but certainly by the next day, by Sunday, we were not the only ones at that con using that car park.
Yeah.
So I suspect we weren't the only ones who found it on Saturday.
So yeah, we went there, got in. When we got in, even though there was some problems with traffic, the line for registration still looked relatively smooth, and I did not see it not be smooth all weekend.
The line was non-existent when we got there.
Yeah. And the floor was generally open at the time, so we took a quick tour around. We did this a little bit the day before. This con had a couple kind of weirdly designed scavenger hunts that I thought might be kind of a fun thing to do.
Yep.
In particular, both of us love ducks for reasons that are too complicated to get into.
Yes, the duck thing in our relationship is long and convoluted and strange, but we love ducks. And
which helps because people keep giving out ducks at cons.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing that like we do just keep getting given ducks at cons.
Which is awesome. You should definitely give us ducks at cons.
Yeah, if you see us at con, we would love a duck. And they were doing a scavenger find a duck thing.
Technically, it was called the Quack Down Lucifer's Lost Duck, which was very confusing because you had to find a specific looking duck.
Yep, which had like a top hat, like I think was themed after the version of Satan from Has Been Hotel.
Mm-hmm.
I think. I've not actually seen Has Been Hotel, so I don't know for sure.
But you had to find that duck to, I guess, win, but it was unclear what you did when you found that duck. And we saw 2 different people at the con that day carrying that duck around who also seemed confused about what to do when they found it.
Yeah. Like, I was wondering if it, because they described it as Satan's duck.
Yeah.
Who'd, like, gone missing. And, like, there would be a prize for returning it. So I was wondering if it was something like, because one of the people who was at the con was the actor from Supernatural who played Satan. I was wondering if it was like, return it to him and get a free signature? Maybe? I have no idea, because it was not, like, there was no indication anywhere what you were supposed to do with the ducks once you found them, because there were other, like, decoy ducks. It explicitly said that, like, if you found any of the other ducks, you could just keep them.
Yeah.
But...
Which we did find 2 ducks.
We did find 2 ducks.
Yep. But I don't know what you did if you found that one. You just, like, win, and that's the point, but that doesn't really seem like much of a game. It was confusing.
Yeah, the other thing was a Supernatural find the seals, by which I mean they had a bunch of weird squiggly symbols on pin badges that were just like, basically if you went into each room of the con, you could get a pin badge.
Mm-hmm.
and you could collect them all. But apparently, one room ran out. I heard.
Is that the board game room?
Yeah, in the board game room. The board game room didn't run out, but they were saying that they knew at least one of the other rooms had.
Yeah.
So presumably, like, they didn't order enough of one particular badge or something. So
Or maybe
yeah.
just one room was like more common for people to go in, so more people started doing that.
Yeah, so I don't think either of those scavenger hunts was particularly well thought through. Whereas last year they did do a scavenger hunt thing where it was like, find these things, each of them has a QR code on, scan them, take a picture of them, whatever, and then if you found all 11 of them, if memory serves, they were Lord of the Rings characters, because again last year they had a big Lord of the Rings theme.
Yeah.
If you found all of them, you could like turn them in for a prize of some sort. I think. Again, even that one I was completely unclear on. So.
Yeah, I think you were like entered into a prize drawing, but this one it just seemed kind of lame that you had to find just like one duck, and then and if you found that one duck, but also there were other ducks. Like, I know the prize wasn't just the ducks themselves. That would have been fine.
Yeah. So yeah, that whole thing was just kind of very confusing and not very well thought out.
Yeah.
So yeah. So what was our first panel of the day on Saturday?
It was movies. Cleveland Takes the Leading Role, which was from 10:15 to 11 in Theater 2. I'll check to see if I can shout out anyone. It does not have anyone listed as who did that, so I can't shout them out. Okay.
So that panel was primarily about Cleveland as a destination for filmmakers.
Oh yeah, it's based by the Greater Cleveland Film Commission, and their president, Bill Garvey, presented the panel that just talks about all the movies that had taken place in Cleveland or around Cleveland and how they were still trying to get films into Cleveland to film.
Yeah. And in particular, they were talking about how, for anybody who doesn't know, the character of Clark Kent Superman was created in Cleveland, and they lobbied and successfully got the new Superman movie that's coming out in July. Parts of it were shot in Cleveland, and they were very this was a thing they clearly loved, that they'd worked hard on, and they were so happy to be talking about.
Yeah. And this was the first in Theater 2, and it was also the first panel in Theater 2 that we noticed did not let anyone in till exactly 10:15.
Yep, which was dumb.
It just meant there were a bunch of people in the hallway because it was the only event on, and there was nothing else in it, and it required pretty much no setup, and there was no reason to not just let people in.
Yep. Because, yeah, there were like 25 people at that event, because, again, it was the first thing of the day.
So it was fairly well attended, but the room was like nowhere near full, like maybe half full at best. And there was no reason to not let people in to sit down because, again, there was nothing in the room previously.
Yep.
But the panel was good. It was entertaining. They definitely planned a little bit too much for it. But
yes, they again, there was a half-hour time gap between the end of that and the beginning of the next thing. But they were basically there when they were like, okay, have we got any leeway to, we've still got some of this presentation left. Have we got any leeway to run over? They were just told no.
Yeah.
They were just like, you have 1 minute. So they did kind of have to rush the end of that panel, which is maybe because I found it interesting.
I did too. Or like there could have been audience questions or stuff like that, and there was nothing in the room. And then this was the first sign of just there not being very accessible rooms. After that panel, again, I was in a giant candy skirt, so we didn't intend to stay in the room. We were just waiting for the rest of the room to clear out because I couldn't really navigate with my disability in a giant candy skirt across a room of people. While we were just sitting there waiting for the room to clear out, we
were leaning over a phone, checking the schedule, figuring out what we were doing next.
Yeah.
One of the volunteers kind of came over to us and like, were you planning on staying for the next panel?
And we said, no, I'm just in a very difficult cosplay, and we were waiting to clear out.
Yeah.
She, at least in that one interaction, was nice about that.
She was fine about that. Like, she basically said, yeah, that's fair. That does not look easy to maneuver in. Take your time. Which is the correct way to handle that situation.
Yeah. But then the people next to us, who I think were intending to stay, were a couple rows up. And again, there were maybe 3 groups of people in the room, all of 2 people.
Yeah.
She was just like, no, you have to get out of the room. There's already people lined up. Which, again, the next panel also did not have high participation. There was really no need to kick everyone out and make them stand in line for a half hour and not let them into the room for that half hour, despite the fact there was nothing going on, to just have them go back and sit in the same seats they were before.
Yeah.
That was just completely pointless. It just inconvenienced a bunch of people. It helped no one. It didn't get anyone into the room who was otherwise not going to be able to get in because people were camping out in the rooms, and that pretty much never happened this entire weekend because, again, none of the rooms we were ever in, even the celebrity rooms, were full.
Yep.
There was no reason to kick people out.
Some were fuller than others, but I don't think any of them were ever completely full.
Yeah. So there's no reason to kick people out of those rooms whatsoever. Particularly at these panels, which again, were not celebrity panels at all. They were just general panels that probably could have taken place in the smaller rooms also. Like, it would have been a bit more full, but other than that, they would have just been like normal panels.
Yeah. So what did we do after that panel?
After that panel, I think, what did we do?
It's also worth noting that Cleveland or Fan Expo has their own app, which has the schedule on it. And one thing that I really, really hate is that it lists like all of the times for like photo ops and like that kind of stuff. And there's no easy way to filter that out.
Nope, you can filter by room and you can filter just photo ops, but it's quite hard to filter so that you can just get photo ops out, and that's kind of annoying because, again, I don't care.
Yep.
And I just want to look at panels, but
Yep.
that probably also masks the fact that they don't have a lot of panels on. Because then we had one of those awkward half-hour breaks, because the thing about the schedule not just starting at the hour and ending on the hour meant that there were some time periods where you were 15 minutes too late for a panel, and there were also just time periods where there were like 30-minute chunks that you had to find stuff to do.
Yep.
And again, you couldn't just sit and go into a room and wait for a panel because they would not let you do that typically, unless it was one smaller room.
Was that when we went to the board game room?
Yeah, we went to the board game room for the first time and played Azul, which I think the guy kept making fun of us by Sunday for playing in like 30-minute spurts throughout the weekend just because we had a lot of awkward 30-minute time blocks.
Yep. Which again, for the record, if you end up listening to this, we weren't offended by that.
No,
we
that
knew
was
exactly
funny.
what you meant. Like,
Yeah, you were joking around with us. It was nice to have a report with you over the weekend.
Yeah.
And after that, we went to, I think, your favorite panel and one of my favorite panels this weekend.
Yep.
And I do want to emphasize, this is the point where the top two smaller rooms for the con on Saturday, they just stopped manning those completely. They didn't have door people checking people in.
Yep.
They didn't have anyone there helping the panelists. The panelists were just like expected to show up and kind of manage the room themselves with zero help.
Yeah, they were just on their own.
Yep.
So this particular panel was being run by, would you like to...
Sorry, mine's want to know. This does not have a panelist listed, but it was done by a MD/PSG or PhD, excuse me.
You really can't get the word PhD wrong, honey.
Oh, shut up.
For anybody who's not aware, my wife has a PhD of philosophy.
So she did emphasize she used she, her pronouns.
Yep.
Was excellent.
Absolutely fantastic.
And the panel is technically called A Shock to the System, the Medicine Behind the Magic. But their name is not listed on the panel, so I cannot give it to you. Or her name.
But she was an absolutely fantastic panelist. She had a presentation basically prepped about like the real medical science behind stuff that you see in film and TV and movies. And she did it with quite a lot of audience participation of like, okay, so we see this happen. What do you think is happening here? That kind of stuff before going into, okay, yep, you're in kind of the right ballpark. Let's narrow this down and talk the actual science.
It was very fun. It was interactive. It was timed perfectly. I could tell that she had practiced.
Yeah.
And left a few minutes for like questions at the end, including one questions that somebody asked, I think, about The Last of Us. And then she was like, yeah, one of my residents said that this question would likely come up. I haven't seen that show, but here's likely the answer. That was a lot of fun.
That was great. But
she was fantastic.
She was great. Like, again, that was probably my favorite panel experience of the weekend, like by a lot. So yeah, if you are listening to this, you probably aren't. You did a phenomenal job, and thank you for the hat.
Yeah, because he got one of the first questions, I think, and you got to win a knit hat because of that.
Yeah, which I think she made herself.
Yep.
So, yeah.
But she was a little bit flustered at the beginning, not through any fault of her own, but because her presentation obviously required a PowerPoint, and she needed help setting that up, and they actually had to run and get somebody to help her.
Yeah.
Because no one was around to help set that up when they had plenty of volunteers whose job it could have been to do that, but I think they were all manning and like shoving people out of panel room A and panel room B.
Yep. Again, it became increasingly clear that the management of this con didn't give a damn about the panel rooms other than main events and, to a lesser extent, room 2. Like, they just didn't care.
Mm-hmm.
I described it at one point as feeling like they're like the panels were vestigial organs at this con. They were a thing that they've still got, but like,
I'm still connected to the medicine panel.
Yeah, thank you. I was impressed with that segue.
I know.
But like, it did not feel like if we'd been paneling at this con, which we did contemplate doing,
Yeah.
I think we would have felt really disrespected.
Yeah.
So yeah, but no, that panel was fantastic. My only real issue was I wish she'd had a full hour time slot rather than just that 45-minute one,
Yeah,
because I would have liked
longer.
a little more time for questions at the end.
Yeah.
That's not on her. That is the time slot she was given.
And she stayed very true to time. Did not need anyone to help her out with that.
I'm going to be honest, I feel like she's got experience teaching or some variation thereof, because
Gee, it's almost like college professors and professional teachers are trained in that craft and know what they're doing.
yes, I taught high school. So, again, she was great.
Yeah. Sorry, that was just an aside of the fact that, like, certain people throw shade at college professors a little bit more than they should. Just saying.
But yeah, so what was after that?
So after that, sorry, again, scrolling through the, like, 600 Smallville photo ops.
Also, I did love the fact that you were confused by one thing on the schedule, which was lots of photo opportunities of Jared Padalecki and Baby.
I was confused with what Baby meant.
Yeah, you were wondering if he brought a kid with him.
Yeah.
What they actually, for those Supernatural fans out there, you might be able to guess what Baby was. They had a what I think was a '67 Chevy Impala. At the very least, it was a very good likeness for the one from the show on the con floor. And if you paid a bunch of money, you could take a photo with it. And if you bought, the appropriate photo opportunity, you could get a photo with both Jared Padalecki and the car. But I do find it interesting that about halfway through Saturday, they put a bunch of curtains around the car.
I guess so you couldn't, like, take pictures of it because you had to pay to take pictures of the car also.
Yep, I'm pretty sure that's why they did that. They did not want you taking photos of it without having paid them money for it. Which I sort of get.
But also, it's a car.
Yeah.
Like, it's not a person, it's a car.
Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong, Baby is very much a character in the show. It's
but it's a car.
Yes.
Like, it's a prop. Like, just let people take pictures of the prop.
Yeah. But anywho.
So, yeah, after that, again, a bit of a break. Then we did Thumb's anti-trivia in the bingo rooms. This was part of the bingo room stick. So last year they just did bingo, which we, again, did during downtime during the con. This, they had, like, a trivia app that they wanted you to try, which I don't think we were terribly fans of. Maybe some people would like it, but
it wasn't that good. This was Thumbsy,
in
case you're curious, and so we really like trivia, like to the point where at our wedding we wrote our own trivia quiz.
Mm-hmm. And we drive an hour to play trivia about once a week.
Hour and a half at the moment because of where it currently is.
So we're people who know how trivia questions should be asked, and these weren't, I think, trivia questions. I mean, they do call it anti-trivia, to be fair. I do think it's kind of trivia for people who don't really like trivia. So maybe we weren't the target demographic.
Yeah.
Basically, you get the app on your phone, and then they ask questions, which at a con takes a while, and this is a problem I have with some con games. Is just it takes a long time to explain the rules of a game at a con because people come in and out of the room, someone's in the back of the room not paying attention, so you have to explain the rules 5 or 6 times.
Yep.
So it kind of gets to be a bit chaotic. So it took them about 10 minutes just to set up the game. Because you also had to, like, QR code link to it, the QR code to even get on the app. And then it basically asks you pretty obvious trivia questions, and you get points for answering quickly, which wasn't a lot of fun for us because it's basically who can be fastest with their phone, which isn't really a type of trivia we enjoy much.
Yeah. And the interesting thing that you noticed, which I didn't for reasons we'll get into in a bit, because this was you gain points as you play, and the points are how long you took to answer each question. So your goal is to have the lowest score at the end. The people who won it answered one question because they came in late.
Yep. So yeah, they had a score or a total score of 0.5 seconds because they answered one question incredibly quickly. So they won based off of that.
Yeah.
Which again, it was a bit confusing. I don't blame them for like not saying that they didn't win or anything like that because it was a bit unclear if like you won each question and like that was a prize or if they was doing it cumulatively. Like I think they were just mostly confused.
Yeah.
But
so
I don't begrudge them at all.
Yeah, don't blame them. It's just I'm going to be honest. I feel like your app needs some work, guys. A bunch of work. But yeah. So
after that was the Clark Kent lookalike contest.
Which,
So I sent you over because I assumed, like a normal person, because there was nothing in that room at that point. And again, it takes me a while to get up and down because A, I'm disabled, and B, I'm wearing a giant 40-pound candy skirt around my waist.
yep.
So I sent you, I'm just like, hey, see if like they're letting people into the room yet.
Yeah. So I went out, I looked, and I was like, okay, they're throwing out the previous panel. I'm going, there's starting to be a little bit of a queue waiting for the next panel. I'm going to assume that they're going to let us in reasonably quickly once the room's cleared. So I'll like grab a seat, I'll grab a spot in the line, and you kind of come out to meet me in a couple, when you can.
Yeah. So I debated staying for the next trivia, but I'm like, well, they'll probably let people in the room pretty soon. It starts in like a half an hour, and there's nothing in the room, so why wouldn't they let people in? There's no celebrities in this panel. There's not like a VIP line, so
this is just a stupid, who looks the most like Clark Kent competition.
Yeah. So I stood on one side because, again, the lines that they have on the floor, which they make up, are not remotely distant
you would have been taking up 3 lines.
Yeah, I know. It would have been impossible for me. And I'm not a person who's particularly big. I was just wearing a hoop skirt that was quite large. So I would have taken up too much space, and also I can't stand in lines like that. So I just stood off to the side, and you stood in line, and then it got later.
And I was having a friendly conversation with the guy in front of me in the line that amounted to, what the hell are they doing? Why are we not being let into this room
I could see,
yet?
like, just watching the frustration of people who were in line and were also just confused. Because, again, the door was open. You could see into the room. There was no one in the room. There was nothing going on. There was absolutely no reason why you shouldn't be allowed to sit down.
Yep.
Especially since the other 2 rooms that were across from us also had events, one of which started 15 minutes after ours, that started letting people in.
Yeah, that was the Giancarlo Esposito panel, in case everybody's curious, which started letting people in
a half an hour early,
which was the same thing to do. But yeah, so for whatever reason, whoever was running room 2 that day was just of the opinion they weren't supposed to let people in until the actual start time. So I ended up queuing for close to 40 minutes for this panel, getting increasingly claustrophobic.
Yeah. And you're not even somebody who has severe claustrophobia.
Nope. I don't normally have claustrophobia in crowds. Like,
a line of people were getting increasingly frustrated also. Like, I think it actually did actively carry over a little bit into the event because people were just less into it by the time they got in because they were just stuck in this line for no reason for way too long.
Yeah.
And again, this was not a celebrity event. It was a bunch of people who were dressed up like Clark Kent. It did wind up having a bit celebrity part, which I was not thrilled about, especially if it somewhat contributed to the wait. But
yeah, like I mean, again, they eventually let us in, which took way too goddamn long.
And they had the people who were dressing up as Clark Kent on one side.
Yep, which is fair. I was unclear if you were meant to like sign up for that beforehand.
Yeah, they could have been better explained.
Or if it was just like turn up at the door in your Clark Kent costume.
Some people volunteered you because you do look like Clark Kent a little bit.
You have told me this, and like again,
I think you would have had fun participating, but also like by the time we actually got into the room, I was just too tired to care at that point.
Yeah, and there were also a bunch of people who like actually turned up in costume, whereas I would have just been like taking off I would have just been taking off my waistcoat, putting on your spare pair of glasses, and calling it done, which I feel would have been disrespectful to all the people who turned up and actually tried. So
So they did that. They tried to make this like. Okay. I don't think anyone in the room was actually surprised by this. We all knew it was happening. They gathered all the people who were dressed like Clark Kent on stage, and what do you think they did at a con that has a bunch of people who played Superman?
So they were like, "Oh, we've got some surprise guests."
Oh, I wonder who that could be.
So Tom Welling, Tyler, however you pronounce his surname, the actor who plays Clark in Superman and Lois, and also George Newbarn, which was cool. Newman?
I don't know.
The actor who played Clark in Justice League. And by Justice League, I mean the animated series, not the movie. But again, they stayed on stage for about 30 seconds and then left. And it felt kind of pointless. Like, if they'd been the ones judging the contest, I think I would have not minded it as much. But they basically stayed for long enough for a quick photo opportunity and then left. And this is not on them. I want to clarify, this was very clearly something the con wanted them to do. and they were very personable with the people on stage. Like
Yeah.
I saw some handshakes. I saw some, like like Tom Welling in particular. I noticed like one person had turned up very specifically as Smallville Clark.
Yep.
With like the red jacket and the blue like shirt, and he stopped very deliberately, like shake that person's hand, and
Yep.
like I that was great. Like I suspect that was a nice moment for the people on stage. It's just by that point, I think you and I were both pretty ticked off from the line beer.
Yeah, we were just trying to figure out if, like, for some reason they kept us in line longer just to verify they could get the celebrities in and, like, sneak them in without anyone seeing them or whatever else,
Which, with hindsight, I don't think was the reason. I think whoever was running that room just decided we shouldn't be let in until the start of the panel.
Yeah.
Which was just the wrong decision. Like, fundamentally, don't do that again.
Yeah. It ticked a bunch of people off. Like, no one enjoyed the panel. Because the thing is, the competition also only lasted about 30 minutes. So we were in line longer than it was to, like, watch that event, which it was a very cute event. I absolutely adored it just because I love Clark Kent as a character, and the people who were dressing up were great. Like, I really, really loved it.
Like, and it eventually got to the point where, like, they sort of lined everybody up and said, okay, they did them, like, introduce, do a pose, answer a question about Superman, and then, like, they did an audience cheer thing for, like, the top 5.
Yep.
Then each of the 3 judges who were all in some way connected to Superman.
I'm a bit unclear on that, but yes.
Which again, if the judges had been the actors who portrayed Superman, I think that would have been
fantastic. I get why they probably couldn't do that just in terms of coordination, and also you didn't want the room getting mobbed by people who were, because I did like the fact that the focus was on the people who were cosplaying. Clark Kent,
I would agree.
And not the judges, but
I would agree.
It might have had to have fun with them be like a surprise judge or stay to judge as like a surprise judge, but you didn't know who that was. That type of thing I might have thought was cute.
Yeah, and then each of the judges picked like their personal favorite of the remaining 5, and then they picked an overall winner. And I think the guy who won probably was the right choice to win.
So yeah, when they got down to the top 3, you had somebody who was playing Smallville Clark Kent. You had somebody who was Superman. They were in a Superman costume,
and they'd done their makeup, and they did a really good job of doing their makeup to make themselves look like Christopher Reeve.
Yeah, they did a really great job of being a Superman.
Like chef's kiss, really good job, dude.
And then we had somebody who was dressed as Christopher Reeve, but as Clark Kent, and like was doing all the adorable mannerisms of Clark Kent on stage.
The pushing up with the glasses, and like he dropped his briefcase at one point in a way that was very clearly like staged, and it was. Again, you're not listening to this podcast. If you're listening to this podcast, you did a fantastic job, dude. You absolutely deserve that win.
Yeah. He was the one I was hoping would win.
So was I.
Because he was just the character who most clearly, or person who most clearly loved Clark Kent. So I'm glad he won. It was a fun competition. I love Clark Kent as a character.
Yeah.
Not Superman. I do love Superman also, but I love Clark Kent. So I really loved that event. It was probably one of my favorites. I just wish we didn't have to wait longer than the actual event to just sit down in the room where the event was held. Yeah,
because like that event being about 30, 35 minutes was probably about the right amount of time for it. They had a dozen entrants. Each one took a couple of minutes.
And I want to emphasize with this, the audience was still about like half-ish full. Like there was plenty of space in the room.
Yep, if that. And again, clearing panel rooms in between panels. Yeah. So what was after that?
So after that, we rushed off to anything then. And this was definitely, at this point in the con, just because of how the con was running, I think we were both getting a little bit overwhelmed and irritated, even though we had some very good events that day. I don't know if you were feeling that.
Yeah, I definitely was. Like,
in case you couldn't tell, we were kind of irritated about this con. I don't know if that's come across.
How the fact that we're over an hour in, like when we paused it to get pizza, I looked at it and went, "Oh God, we're more than 45 minutes into this episode, and we have not got on to day 2 yet." So so what was it? I feel like at that point there was a bit of a break.
Yeah, we did another break, and then we did another sketch duel.
Another sketch duel again. It was good.
Yep. John, Boy, Myers, and Rags Morales.
Yep, and they did some beautiful work. They only did one piece of art each.
But they did it in detail.
They did it in detail. It was really good. In particular, I adored one of the proposals was Superman and Lois kissing.
Yep.
and that's the one that the artist chose to do, and it was gorgeous. It was really, really good. That if we'd of the pieces of art that were up for sketch duel prizes this weekend, that's the one I would have wanted to win if we won anything. We didn't.
That's absolutely okay.
That's absolutely okay.
We've won at sketch duels before. I think that person will like it a lot.
Yeah, the person who won it looked like they would really love it. So absolutely, not disappointed, but that was a beautiful piece of art.
And it is worth noting that a lot of these artists do have booths, and a lot of them will let you commission them to draw you like what you want to be drawn. Like a lot of the time, you have to pay them, obviously, but they're artists shouldn't have to work for free. And if we wanted a photo like that badly, I'm sure we could have gone by that guy's booth and asked for something similar. And he probably would have given it to us.
He absolutely would. Again, it's the same way that 2 years ago we got Agnes to draw us.
Yep.
And she did a phenomenal job.
She did. So then we kind of got the back of like the Star Wars fighting techniques panel. We weren't trying to go to that one. we were trying to go to the panel after that.
Yeah, we wanted to go to the panel after that. And this is another thing of like, they clearly just kind of abandoned all of those panel rooms to just do their own thing, because this was a panel where they brought a bunch of lightsabers and were demonstrating a bunch of like techniques when you're dueling with lightsabers. But the chairs were way too close to the stage. The stage had a table on it, which meant they were super cramped in. Like, I don't think that panel ran anywhere near as well as it would have if somebody had thought, oh, they might need somebody to move some chairs, or they just put it in a better room.
So then we stayed and moved up to the front for the Marvel Hot Takes panel, which was interesting.
It was okay. I've been to better versions of that panel.
So this was basically a panel where we had to defend certain hard takes, like Theranos was right.
I love the way you pronounce Thanos.
I don't even care. I always get it mixed up with like that company Elizabeth Holmes ran. In case you can't tell, I don't really watch a lot of film or movies. I'm more of a fan of cons than I am of any particular medium. So yeah, I generally do, even if I don't know something, like people arguing what they're passionate about. That one was just kind of poorly done. Also, the reverb on those mics in that particular room all weekend was just messed up, and no one was there to fix it. So it just stayed that same like way all weekend. The mics were way too sensitive, which meant that
one mic was way too sensitive. One of them was fine.
Yeah. But it wasn't fixed all weekend because no one was in that room to do tech support all weekend, so no one knew how to fix it.
Yeah. So I'm trying to remember, what was the hot take that I ended up going up to defend?
How would I remember that? You were the one who defended it.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, again, like that was one I could have gone either way on. But I
wasn't it like there was the relationship one you did?
Oh yeah, it was the Natasha Romanoff Bruce Banner ship that's in Avengers: Age of Ultron. Like, was it a good inclusion in the movie? And I was arguing no. Which again, like I volunteered to go up for that because you like me to volunteer for these kind of panels, because let's be honest, I have this voice. I'm a competent public speaker.
Well, it's also like both of us are generally pretty comfortable in panels, and as people who both run panels and I'm an academic teacher, having people participate can make or break participation panels. So I really like to like volunteer and participate so that the panels like work. Yeah. And I will say one thing that this panel did right is they did have a bunch of panelists on board, and those panelists volunteered to speak when no one else wanted to, which I did think helped make the panel at least sort of kind of work. Yeah. But again, because they had a bunch of pre-prepared hot takes, rather than just letting the audience come up and state theirs, I do feel like, I don't know, I feel like we're a bit hemmed in ways we didn't want to be. A little bit. It also just made us talk about like topics that might not be like topics everyone wants to talk about. And I would like a little bit more like structure in terms of the rules, because like I think they were supposed to vote on who won, and they didn't really ever, and some of them were just kind of decided. But they just kind of ran with it. It was an interesting conversation. It just wasn't, I don't know, my favorite version of doing that conversation. But I don't think it was a badly run panel. They did okay with what they were given. So yeah. I just think we would have done it differently. And not everyone's style is going to work with everyone else's. So. Yeah, I would agree with that as a statement. So yeah, what was next? We stayed in that room for Are You Smarter Than a Winchester trivia. Yeah, so as we previously mentioned, we like trivia. We go to
lot of trivia, and I do like Supernatural quite a lot.
And I do want to emphasize, this seems like something they were just planning to do, like outside of their booth, that then they got put in a room to do. And I don't think they were quite prepared for it to be a full-on panel. I think it was more meant to be like a competition they had at like their booth, because this was a group of people who were hosting a booth at the con.
Yeah, they had a con. Yep. Because again, their booth was actually down in that area at the bottom.
Yeah.
It wasn't in the vendors hall.
Yeah, and I think that's why is they basically planned this to just be an activity they did at their booth at that time of day. They asked if it could be on the schedule, and I think because they seemed a little bit desperate for paneling at this con, they put them in a panel room, which meant that they got way more people, because it was just at their booth. I think they would have gotten they said they were expecting about 10 teams.
Yeah.
I think if it was just something that happened casually outside of their booth in the middle of the whole floor, they might have gotten maybe 10 teams at most.
Because they had 10 questions.
And they had 10 like official like note cards print out, which they did design and looked pretty cool, but they didn't have as many of them as they anticipated. Because again, I don't think they were really prepared to
do it as a full-on panel.
Because it took about 30 minutes to do total, and it took longer to set up and explain the rules.
Yeah.
And I think they were a little bit overwhelmed by it, which they themselves they admitted.
Yeah, like again, I don't think this is on them. This is another.
Yeah, I don't know whose decision that was to move them or why it happened.
I also don't know when it happened. I get the impression it probably happened pretty late.
Yeah. And they might not have been informed of it. That's also possible. So it was perfectly fine trivia. I thought the questions were pitched about right. It's just there were only 10 questions, so it didn't really it wasn't really that entertaining of a quiz.
Yeah. Which again, given what I think they planned for, I think they pivoted fairly well.
Yep.
It's just it could have been a lot more, and I suspect if they'd known where they were going to be and the space they were going to have and all of that stuff, I think they would have pitched it differently. So yeah.
So after that, we left, because the only thing that was left that night was this weird Smallville Nights exclusive event that they were promoting very hard, which was with Tom Welling and Michael Rosenbaum. I do not know who set the prices for this, but it was like $200 a ticket, and it was unclear like what that even got you. Because I looked at it briefly, just because this is something that if it was like maybe $50, I would have considered as an additional ticket price if it was like a smaller, more inclusive thing. But 200 was too much, and it also it said it started at 7:30, but the ticket time it gave me for entry was 7:40, and I was just like, does this mean I don't get in the whole event? Because if I'm paying $210, I want to get into the whole event, and I just didn't want to do that. So
so we did not bother with that.
Yeah, we just kind of went home.
Yeah.
We were also pretty tired because I was up late with our dog the night before. So were you. So
was I, and again, we had to wake up pretty early to get to the con, so yeah.
Speaking of which, there might be a special guest in 2 weeks when we go to Cleveland Pet Expo. It has a similar name, but is in no way associated with Cleveland Fan Expo.
Yeah, completely different thing. But so that will be a future episode.
Yeah. So again, I don't know who set the ticket prices on this or whose idea it was. This event came up pretty late because I didn't see it advertised till then, so I don't really know who was behind that or whose team was in charge of that event. So yeah.
But yeah. So that was Saturday, which it didn't help that by the end of the day, I just had an absolute belter of a headache. Which that's on me for leaving the Advil at home.
My thing with Saturday generally is Saturday does tend to be my least favorite day of the con generally because it's crowded. There's a lot of people there. It's harder to do stuff. What I like is that the transition into Sunday is actually kind of nice because by Sunday you know everyone at a con, at least at a smaller con, even at a bigger con, you're seeing some of the same faces every weekend. Everyone's a little bit more chillaxed. It's a little bit more fun vibes, and I was kind of hoping that Sunday would wind up being that at this con. And it's not, because I think that they made a targeted decision to...
So, yeah.
Do you want me to?
Yep.
So I'm just going to be blunt. Things like Fan Expo and also GalaxyCon, which also has events in Ohio, they're corporate cons. And what they're going to look at is numbers. And I do think a large reason why we have to tap our tickets to get into events is so that they can track numbers for those events. So they can think of how to more maximize them. And I get that this is a business decision. And I get that most cons are going to look at con numbers and be like, Sunday is our weakest day. How can we promote events on Sunday? And I think that's what happened with this con, which as a business decision, I don't begrudge them, but it does mean my fan experience was kind of lowered on Sunday because I couldn't get that nice, kind of quiet, winding down, cozy con feeling I love from Sunday.
Yeah. So again, Sunday we got up a little bit later because there wasn't a panel we really cared about until what, like 11:45.
Yeah, they didn't have much on the mornings, I think, because they were purposely working around hotel checkout time, which I thought was interesting. Because hotel checkout time is generally 10. They have no events at 10. Everything started at like 11:45. Which again, I like early Monday morning, Sunday events because again, they're not crowded, but they didn't want to do anything that wasn't going to do numbers.
Yep.
And they did have a special guest that was here just for this day, which I do think was purposeful.
Yep, which was David Tennant,
Yep.
the 10th Doctor.
And there was a ton of David Tennant fans there,
Yep.
which is great.
Absolute bucket load of people in Doctor Who cosplay. I'm pretty sure people thought we were.
Yep.
Because the costumes for today, which I didn't even think about until we got to the con.
No, we just kind of ran with it.
Yep. You have a Starry Night ball gown.
Yep.
Which has a print of Van Gogh's Starry Night on it. It's fabulous.
Uh-huh.
And I have a quick cobble together Vincent Van Gogh costume. Basically, it amounts to a hat, and I put some red makeup on my ear to indicate, like, bloody injury. It's simple, it's easy, it's a good, well, I say simple and easy, it's still a ball gown for you.
Yeah, but it's a lot easier to move around in. I did get a lot of compliments today, though, which I did like.
You did.
It's where I'm saying today. It's been a very long day.
Yeah. But yeah, so we did those costumes, and I completely forgot about the Vincent and the Doctor, which is an episode of Doctor Who, which is a very good episode of Doctor Who, which is about them meeting Vincent Van Gogh. And so I think a few people thought we'd kind of done that on purpose to tie into the Doctor Who theme. It wasn't on purpose, but it did kind of work. Yeah, we'll need to keep that in mind for the future. But and I don't think it's a coincidence that David Tennant's big panel is literally the last thing on the schedule.
Yep. I think it's purposely there to keep people in the vendors hall for as long as possible and keep them at the con for as long as possible. Because we left that day just because we were getting, I think, completely overwhelmed by the crowds at around 2, which is generally around the time on Sunday when a lot of people are just kind of checking out of cons and you have closing ceremonies. That place was packed.
Yeah.
Like, it was basically maybe slightly less crowded than Saturday, but not by much at all.
It was less crowded than Saturday, I would say that, but I would agree it was still a lot of people.
Yeah.
Which is unusual for a con on a Sunday.
Yeah. Which, again, I don't begrudge them as a business decision.
But if you're going to do that, you need to make sure there's actually enough stuff on for all the people here.
And you need to let people into rooms.
Yep.
And don't kick them out of rooms either, because, again, none of your rooms are actually filling. You know they're not actually filling, and I know you know that because you're buzzing us in at every room. So you know exactly how much people are in those rooms every time. And you probably knew by Sunday that none of those rooms were going to fully fill. So just let people in them. They're not taking seats away from anyone else.
Yeah. So first up today, what do we do first up today? What was the 11:45?
That was the Supernatural panel.
Yes.
So this was something for, again, because there was nothing on, people were lined up from like 10 outside in the hallway and they weren't letting anyone in. We did not do that. We went to the board game room for a third time to play Azul.
Yep.
Hi, board game guy, if you're listening to this, I'm sorry I don't remember your name. You were very nice, and we like you, and we don't mind you teasing us about continuously to go into your con room to play Azul.
Yep. So that panel was Jared Padalecki and Mark Shepard.
Yep.
That's Sam and Crowley, for anybody who's seen Supernatural but forgets.
You've seen all but the last season, because you met me during the last season?
Yep. I basically stopped watching TV after I met you because you don't, and I didn't have a chance to. And now I've got this annoying thing called a job, which makes it harder to watch stuff.
I saw Gilmore Girls like 10 years ago. So I know Jared Padalecki from that. I did find it entertaining, even though I didn't see the show, which is always a sign of a good Q&A panel for me.
Yeah.
But
here's where we get into our complaints about the way that we're running these events. So I get the vibe, and this could be just us like interpreting stuff that wasn't there. I get the impression that that Jensen and Mark, no, not Jensen, Jared and Mark wanted to have more interaction with the fans.
Yep.
And the con was not letting them at this event. Like,
it was more apparent in the next panel.
It was more apparent in the next panel, granted, but they had their moderator up on stage who was the one asking all the questions.
Yeah.
They had pre-screened selected fan questions.
Which, again, were from people in Chicago, Illinois, and Ontario, which are conveniently places that also have fan expos, but probably were not from people who were actually going to attend this con.
Yeah.
They were people who were in those areas and attended cons in those areas and had their questions selected, but because this was done on the internet, probably through a Google form, weren't even at the con to have their question answer be heard.
Like um, every time they were like, "Oh, this question is from whoever it was," like he was deliberately shout. They were deliberately shouting into the audience, be like, "Hey, where are you?" And like they weren't there.
And they were making awkward jokes about the fact that they weren't there. It's just kind of a
the first time they made like an awkward joke about it. After that, I think they realized that like most of those fan approved questions were not from people actually at the con, and I think that annoyed them a little.
Yeah.
Like I got that vibe. I could just be reading more into it than was there.
Yeah.
But
And again, they were doing a fairly good job because I do want to emphasize that all of the questions they ask by the moderators are incredibly like bland questions. They do a very good job of like having chemistry and adding to making them at least somewhat interesting.
yeah, like again, these panels were enjoyable because the celebrities at them were working their asses off to make them enjoyable. Whereas it really felt like the moderators were holding them back.
Yeah.
Like they wanted to. I feel like they wanted to interact more with the crowd and just get those audience questions. Hear those audience stories, and it felt like they just weren't being allowed to. And again, I'm probably reading more into that than was.
You definitely weren't for the next panel. I'll put
for
it
the
that
next
way.
panel. I wasn't. But yeah. So again, that was a good panel.
I enjoyed the chemistry between the characters.
The efforts of the con.
And they did eventually. We entered after the line had already gone in, and they were at least for the main events from letting people in 30 minutes early, as they should be.
Yep. Yeah, which did mean that we got chairs that we were off to the side. We were primarily because they had two giant screens, one on either side, which were like.
I was watching the stage. You were watching the screen. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
I kind of divvied it back between them. But I didn't really mind either way. But you could see the stage. And
you could just about see the stage. Yeah.
I could at least. So.
Yeah.
And again, it was fine. It was well done room, and like they at least had stuff on either side, which was nice.
Yep.
And then the panel ended, and
we basically did what we have been doing at this con, which is
wait for people to get out.
Yep, check the schedule, see what we're going to do next.
And then somebody came up to me, and I said that they were moving people out of the room again, which I wasn't surprised by, but was annoyed by. And then I just explained to him politely that I had a disability and was waiting people to clear out, and he snapped at me quite rudely.
Yeah,
I was mad.
Yeah, I was also pretty ticked about that. He basically said, "Well, you need to get out of the room. We're clearing the room." And again, like, I don't know who this volunteer specifically was. It's not like I can put, it's not like.
No, and I also think it's unfair of the con. I don't know if they're doing this for free or whatever, and I also don't think it's really fair to like ask people who are volunteering for your con to have a confrontational interaction with people who are sitting in a room. Like that's just not fair to your volunteer staff. That's dangerous for them. It's not fun for fans. Don't ask them to do that. That's not okay.
It's really not. Like I was pretty miffed with that guy, but I'm more miffed with the organization of the con that led to that interaction. Because again, that's really rough on you specifically.
It is, because as a disabled person, you tend to have to self-advocate a lot for even just the basic things. And again, it's just something for which I can't be in a crowd of people getting out of the room. That's dangerous for me. So I'm just waiting for the room to clear, and I should be allowed to do that. And you had another panel that was scheduled 30 minutes after that, and you're insisting upon clearing the room to let all those people back in.
Yep.
I don't know why you made that decision. That's not a smart decision. It's not fair to anyone who's disabled in that room who has to get out of the room, and then if they want to go to that panel, go back into the room.
Yep. So we left the room.
We did, along with everyone else, and I will point out that, again, everyone who was leaving with me were all people who are either visibly disabled or invisibly disabled, but in a way that was at least obvious enough to see.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And it just felt shitty.
Yep.
And then we went to a panel that I'm not going to actually say the name of.
Yeah, we went to a panel that sucked hard.
So I'll let you do the work.
Yeah, so this was a panel where it seemed like the panelists just kind of volunteered to do it for the sake of a free badge, didn't plan anything. One of them was literally just kind of sitting behind the panel playing with Yu-Gi-Oh cards, while the other was like vaguely shouting questions at the audience. And like, this might be the worst panel we've ever seen, I'm not going to lie.
That seems kind of mean.
Yeah. But
I mean, the panel next to us was also like, could have been a pretty bad panel that we went to after that. It just was saved by.
Yeah. But yeah, so again, we left that after like 10 minutes because we're like, no, this just
is
sucks.
not. Yeah, and it's something for which, like, if it's your first time running a panel and you're not somebody who's trained to do like academic work or speaking or something like that, you might kind of underestimate how much you really need to prepare to do a panel, and I can understand that.
Yeah.
And I don't think like this person is to blame half as much as I blame the con staff for anything else.
Yeah.
But it is something for which, if you're going to do a panel, you need to do at least the bare minimum prep to make sure that you have enough stuff to entertain a crowd for that particular point in time. And you shouldn't just do it to get a free badge. You should do it because you actually enjoy that topic and want to talk about it. Like the doctor we saw earlier, yeah, they got a free badge probably for doing that panel, but they also were so enthusiastic about what they were doing.
Yeah, like that is somebody who loves microbiology.
Yeah.
And wants other people to understand how cool it is, which, yeah.
So we pivoted from that. The next panel, that was the celebrity panel with James and Oliver Phelps, had not started yet because we were made to leave the room, and then there was a 30-minute gap. We went to that panel and we came back. So we did all that, got up, left the room, came back, and sat down in the same seats we had for the previous panel.
Yep.
Next to a bunch of people who had left the room, come back, and done the same thing, all to sit in the seats that they had for the previous panel.
So that was aggressively pointless.
Yeah.
Incidentally, if you're not aware of who James and Oliver Phelps are, they were the twin brothers who played the Weasley twins in the Harry Potter movies.
They currently have a baking show. I will also say that Harry Potter is not really a franchise we publicly engage with much anymore for the reasons you might expect.
Yeah.
But seeing a panel of James and Oliver Phelps at a con that we otherwise paid for and is not benefiting anyone who we don't support anymore is, I think, fine.
Yeah. Also, trans rights are human rights.
Yes.
You know, let's be very clear about where we stand on that.
Yeah.
And I'm really depressed that we have to make that statement.
Yep, we believe that trans rights are human rights. We don't support TERFs, but money does not go into TERFs' pockets, at least
Not directly
from anything we did by attending this panel. It was not talked about at the panel.
In fact, it was very deliberately not talked about at this panel.
Well, he was almost like, I do not know what was going on with this particular one. The other questions at the other panels were bland. This panel seems like it was legitimately, the Q&A was written by AI. It was concerning.
Yeah.
I felt bad for them.
Yeah. Like, the questions were so aggressively weapons-grade milquetoast.
Well, it was either that or they were mostly asking about their characters in Harry Potter, or I guess the franchise that shall not be named if you prefer. They were just like, what Harry Potter house are you in? They weren't even like set questions about them as actors, which I was thinking about. It was basically just like, aren't you like your characters, and what would Fred and George say in a circumstance like that? It was weird.
Are you as mischievous as your your characters? What are some of the best pranks that got played? Like, oh god.
Yeah, it was weird.
Yeah, and it reached the point where like it's so clear that they were desperate to have any interaction with the crowd that when they got up to like a specific
they were wanting to play a game of this or that, which was clearly going to be all Harry Potter or this or that questions after they made them do Harry Potter trivia that they didn't know, because again, they're actors. They played in the Harry Potter series, but they probably have not interacted with it like a lot of us since that time period, nor should they be expected to like know stuff in that level of detail.
So yeah, they literally were just like, yeah, can we get some help with this? And just invited 2 kids from the crowd up onto the stage. Which
terrified, and I mean terrified, the moderator.
The moderator was like, oh, okay. Like, you could hear the crack in her voice. Like, I suspect, was under the impression she was going to get a major telling off for letting that happen.
Yeah. But thankfully she did let it happen. Not that she really could have stopped it.
She couldn't have stopped it at that point. Like, the kid was already halfway to the stage.
Yeah, they just basically pulled 2 kids on the crowd. And these were, again, children. You can't really kick them off the stage. Yeah. So they answered a bunch of Harry Potter this or that questions. And James and Oliver Phelps, like, provided commentary, which was awesome.
That was great. That was the best part of the panel.
Yeah.
Because, again, like, one of the kids was clearly very shy.
Yeah.
And just, like, whispering their answers to
I think
them.
It was James Phelps, yeah.
And that was super, super sweet.
Yeah.
Like
it was adorable.
That was the most wholesome thing that happened at that entire panel, and it was great. Like, if the rest of the panel had been that, we would have enjoyed it a lot more. Like, they were trying so hard to overcome the moderator.
Yeah. I really think AI wrote that panel.
Yeah,
I don't know how else to explain that.
I don't know who wrote that moderator's script, but whoever you are, you're bad at your job.
Yeah, that was bad.
You are really bad at your job. Like, oh, good lord. So yeah, they saved that panel,
and they deserve all the props in the world.
And they deserve all the props in the world for that. They shouldn't have had to.
Yeah, and I hope that they were not told off for like
pulling that, because that just made the panel better by a long shot.
It was adorable. It was great. It gave them actual real fan interaction, because that's the reason I go to Q&A panels personally. I wish more people got this. Like, I don't go to get my questions answered. I go because I like seeing fans and celebrities like interact.
Yeah.
Like, I don't care that much, but I love seeing somebody get up and like what happened with the Adam Savage panel, where they're just like, they're talking about what Adam Savage meant to them, and like seeing that connection between two people is just awesome. That's what I go for.
But here's the thing, at this con, I'm pretty sure they didn't want that at the panels that you didn't have to pay extra for. They wanted those moments and interactions to be at the signing booth, where you are paying $100 for a signature and to talk to your celebrity.
Yeah.
I'm 90% sure that's why the Q&A panels were set up the way they were.
Yeah.
And I'm 100% convinced the only reason the Adam Savage one wasn't like that is he told them to go away.
Yeah, I appreciate the save there.
Yeah. We've been doing a lot of cursing after this particular con, but
yeah, it kind of takes us off in a way.
But yeah, when we uploaded this podcast, I did not tick the box that says this podcast contains adult language, so we're on our good behavior.
Unlike some of the panelists who definitely cursed, which was great.
There was a bunch of curse. Like the panelists, I feel like they were just like, yeah, we're gonna curse.
Yep.
I don't care. And I almost feel like those them like chafing at the reins that have been put on them.
Yeah, I do think some of them did have fun and had some fun at their booth interacting with people, but I do think the con seems to think that like if they let you ask questions as a panel, you're not going to pay to ask questions at their booth, which I don't. It's not remotely true.
No,
like
it's
at all.
not.
Like half the time when we've gone to Q&A panels at other cons, there'll be people who've already been to their booth and asked questions who will then like come up and be like, so I thought of something that happened in our conversation earlier that I wanted to ask you about.
Yeah.
And that actually works really great.
Yeah.
Especially because the celebrities, a lot of them remember who comes to their booth and are like, hi, Ryan, nice to see you again, which is awesome.
That's just so sweet when that happens.
Yeah. So yeah, and then they asked them questions with the same format from fans that were pre-selected. The first two were just the same question. That was weird.
Yeah, like it was the same question but differently worded.
But it was the same question.
Which again, if you told me an AI wrote this script, I wouldn't doubt it.
Which they even commented on, and the host even commented on the fact that it was the same question, and I just thought that was weird. And there were a couple other...
And again, when we say the same question, we don't mean like they'd accidentally printed the card twice. No, we mean it was the same question but worded differently.
Yeah.
Like it was clearly a question the same basic question had been asked by multiple people. That happens.
And it was twice in a row. Like, it wasn't even like there were a couple questions in between that question. It was just the same question twice.
Yeah.
It was weird.
It was bizarre. So, yeah.
But yeah, they did a good job working with what they had. I don't begrudge them. That was a tough situation for both of them, and I could tell they were getting kind of uncomfortable with the whole thing, and I'm glad that they were able to like have those moments with those kids, because I think that was clearly the best part of the panel.
Yeah. So after that...
We kind of snuck into the back of the Felicia Day panel, but I was...
At that point, our energy for this con's nonsense was tapped.
It was also just like, it was really crowded at a time on a Sunday when I like to have a little bit of more peace, to just kind of wander around the vendors hall and reflect on the con. And I knew I wasn't going to get that moment at this con where it's like, it's the end of a con, you've done all the stuff you wanted to do, you can just have that happy moment where the vendors hall is like half empty because people have gone home, and you can just like walk through and talk about the con and maybe make some last purchases. That was not happening at this.
Nope. Our vendors hall heaving when we left.
Yeah. So we went to the back of the Felicia Day panel, but because this was in the smaller theater room, even though it didn't need to be, because there was a gap in the main theater room during that time period.
Yeah, I would have put her in the main hall, because the main hall was not being used at that time.
Yeah. So because of that, there wasn't like a video screen you could really see, and I had to sit in the back because I was in a ball gown and my disability. So I couldn't really see, and it was the same moderator as the last panel. And I do want to be clear, I do not know what this moderator's instructions are. I do not know who's directing her. I don't know if these are choices she's making. But they spent the first 10 minutes of that panel talking about the weather and pierogies, and I just couldn't handle it.
Yeah, we were just like, move on to an interesting question, or we're leaving.
Yeah.
And we left. And I get, for the record, that's not on Felicia Day.
That's not on Felicia Day. I don't even know if it's really on the moderator because I don't know what her directions actually are, and I don't know if she also realized that the last panel she did was kind of not great and was trying to like save it but wasn't sure how to, or just like wanted to go without a script because the last script she got was so bad. I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't really want to blame her either.
And again, for the record, I think we would have stayed in that panel if we hadn't just been kind of ticked off by the whole thing at that point. So again, because again, I actually really like Felicia Day's stuff.
I do too. Like I like her a lot as a person, and I also kind of wanted to stay for the Smallville panel, but that was at 3:30, and we left at 2, and people were already lined up, so I just didn't want to even.
Yeah, that was no. I'm pretty sure that would have been like last year with the Hobbit panel, where the line was literally stretching like halfway around the building.
But yeah, we stayed away from the celebrity panels even more last year, but the Hobbit panel that was stretching around the building or whatever, like that was the last panel on like a Saturday night, and we just weren't interested, so we just kind of left. Yeah. So.
That was on my list of, if it's not too busy. Oh, no, way too busy. Okay, no. So, yeah.
So let's talk briefly, because we're almost home, because this podcast is already completely long, about the stuff we didn't do.
Yep.
So celebrity autographs, we can't tell you how those lines or those waits were. I will say, outside one panel, they did have a vamp guy for one of the wait lines on Sunday that they didn't have for the rest of the panel.
That was just weird.
Yeah, that was odd. They also had the cosplay red carpet, which we do actually like. We didn't try this year just because it was bonkers crowded. Do you want to explain what this is?
So the cosplay red carpet is a thing that we have said more cons should do.
Yeah.
Which is you sign up, you walk, you twirl, you strike a couple of poses, you get your picture taken, that's it.
But they have it on the main con floor, which makes it really hard to navigate, and I think on Saturday would have been damn near impossible to do, so we didn't try it. I do think if they had it in like one of the panel rooms, which they did have open, like even just the second stage was open half the time, just have it in that back room, I think it would have been a lot better.
It would have been fun. Like, it would have been a cute little thing for anybody who has a cool costume and just wants to show it off without any of the like full-on costume contest judging stuff, which they did have.
Yeah, we also did not go to that this year, just because we didn't really feel like fighting to get in the room. We didn't know how crowded it was going to be. So I can't tell you how competently run it was or not. So but that seemed kind of fun. And again, they have those at a lot. We don't tend to participate in a lot of them just because it's a lot of pressure and they have specific rules. So I can't say how it was run. I hope that people had a good time doing it.
Yeah, I would agree with that statement.
Anything else that we did not do that was kind of key? I should probably mention, just because it came up a couple weeks ago, Concoction did have the Artemis Bridge simulator, and we forgot to mention that during our review of Concoction.
Yeah.
So
sorry about that.
Sorry about that. Somebody did care about that point.
Yep.
If that person is still listening 2 hours into this version of events, I apologize.
We are very sorry.
Yes. We'll be sure to mention the Artemis Bridge simulator that does happen at a lot of events later.
Yeah. But yeah. We're only human, we're going to forget things.
Yeah.
So yeah, like, other than that, there wasn't much on at this con. Like, that's my biggest problem with this con. This con had 20 to 25,000 people
and it had the same amount of events, just in terms of sheer number of events, as the con we were at last weekend that have 500 people at most.
It had fewer.
Yeah.
It had fewer events by quite a ways than the Steampunk con we were at last week, which had, a tenth of the number of people.
Yeah. And it ultimately, I think it comes down to this. Like the first year we went to Fan Expo, they had a feedback panel, and I felt like they really cared about getting that fan experience right.
Yeah. We went to that feedback panel. We even had feedback for them at that panel. And the specific piece of feedback we had for them that year was one particular vendor was creepy.
And harassing people.
And they took that and said, we were like, yeah, this one vendor in the hall is, being creepy and weird. And they were like, and they said, you mean, and I'm not going to put them on blast. They said, those people, and I was like, yep. And you are not the only people who've said that. We are not letting them back next year.
And to their credit, they have not been back. I've seen them at other places and harassing people. They've not been back at this con.
They've not been back at this con. Like, they took that feedback and acted on it. This year, they did not have a feedback panel. I don't think they did last year either.
Yeah, and it's just, I'm increasingly becoming, you were talking about this, I think, a little bit before. I don't feel like even though I'm paying for a ticket, I feel like I'm being marketed to vendors and celebrities as a paycheck for them.
Yeah.
I don't feel like I'm going here to like have a fun experience.
No, it feels to me the same way it does when you go on like Facebook or Google, where it's like, they are not there to provide, you are not their customer, you are their product. and it's not a good feeling at a con.
And I do want to emphasize, kind of mentioned this at the beginning, we are being more critical of this con than we would be with a fan run con that's not for profit.
Yeah.
Because this is someone's job, they're making money, and we're paying for this to get a product back from them pretty clearly.
Yeah.
Like, somebody's getting a paycheck, they're getting money, and if I'm giving them money to produce this for me, I expect them to be giving me back what my ticket is. And I don't feel like I got that this weekend.
I don't either. Because again, like, for the sheer number of people they have, they should be booking out more of the con space, because that convention center has more space, and they should be putting on more stuff. Because for one thing,
And they should not be clearing people out of rooms for no reason, or not letting them into rooms for no reason.
Seriously, if we get a hint you're doing that next year, we're not coming back.
We already probably are not.
We already probably are not.
We'll talk about that. You want to, now that we're getting back into town?
Yeah, we are now into our town. This was a 2-hour drive back. I'm pretty sure we have spoken the entire drive back.
I'm not sure who's listening to this. And again,
Nobody.
I do want to emphasize, if you enjoyed this con, that's absolutely great. You're not us. We're not trying to attack anyone who enjoys this con. I want you to have those good experiences. And if for you, you got to hug David Tennant or Jared Padalecki, and that was the one thing you wanted out of this con, and you got that, and this con gave it to you, awesome.
I would agree. Like, if you enjoyed yourself, fantastic. What we are saying is, if you want to make this con a good experience for everybody, here are the things you need to do.
Yeah.
You need to actually give a damn about your programming outside of the celebrity stuff. Like, I don't know how it's possible for a con this size to have so little paneling.
Yeah, and you also need to be just a little bit more accessible with your rooms. Let people in. There's not a reason to have lines in the hallway when you can just let people in and out between panels, particularly when, even at a con this size with this many people, none of those rooms we were at least midday and further, were full. They weren't.
They were not.
And they might have been for the later panels in the day. I get that. But even so, giving your fans a little bit more flexibility and letting them into rooms to sit down is more accessible. It's more charitable. It puts people in better moods, and it makes the experience better for everyone at no cost to you. And for me, like, again, if a con doesn't allow people into empty rooms that are clearly empty, and forces people to wait in the hallway, and clears rooms, and particularly clears rooms for people who have disabilities, visible or invisible, that they shouldn't have to prove to anyone, that's a pretty strong indication that I'm not going to go back to that con.
You know, like the last con we were at that did that, we didn't go back this year. We also got COVID at that con, which probably didn't help our opinion of it.
I really hope we don't get COVID at this con, but
yeah, that will be awkward.
But yeah, it's a really disappointing kind of thing for me, because again, Fan Expo, our first year there, I had a blast at, and I'm sad that this might have to go on the we're not going to go back list.
Yeah. Because again, like, the trouble is, this con has so much potential to be so much better.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they're not cramped for space if they're willing to spend the extra money
for space.
to buy it out.
The celebrities that they actually do get are quite good and seem very amenable to interacting with fans and happy to be there.
It just feels like
most of the panelists they did get did a good job. Yeah.
It feels like the con doesn't trust its fans.
It doesn't trust its fans, and it doesn't seem to care about the support you need beyond the celebrities to make the cons work for people who aren't just there for an autograph, which is, again, still a significant chunk of fans.
Yeah. Like, we go to cons because we like cons. We go because we enjoy hearing people talk about stuff they're passionate about. That's why our favorite panel of this week was a microbiologist talking about, like, you know, basically saying, oh yeah, so when Frodo gets stabbed by Shelob, what kind of toxin do you think we're looking at here? She thinks it might be some variant of cyanide.
Yeah.
Based on the reactions. But, like, that was the part of the con that was good and fun.
Mm-hmm.
And it felt like the top level leadership of this con was fighting against us at this one, because every big, you know, top down decision was the wrong decision for us.
Yep.
So yeah, that was Cleveland Fan Expo. Overall,
we don't normally give cons grades.
Yeah.
We try to be very nice generally, but
yeah, at best this was a C- con for me.
Yeah. And I think the things that make it even that level are, again, the fans. The fans are amazing. Like,
Yeah.
there's such a good atmosphere there with fans and encouraging each other and, like, getting your picture taken. I got my picture taken all weekend while I was in cosplay. People were happy. I got a small child playing with my candy dress for a while. That was awesome.
Yeah, that small child literally cried when you walked away because they wanted to keep playing with the dress.
It was so cute.
Which was adorable. And again, like, it's those moments of interaction that were the good parts, and it bothers me so much that
they tend to make those moments harder, not easier. Because
Yeah.
a con should be facilitating those moments, both between celebrities and just between fans. They just weren't.
because they wanted you to pay extra for them.
Yeah. And they don't put stuff in correct rooms either, which is really frustrating.
You had 10, 15 rooms to play with. Why were there only like 3 panel
And
rooms?
why were there 6 lounges, none of which of them worked as actual lounges?
But again, I think a lot of it comes down to they just did not have paneling content this year. Like, they had so little on the schedule. So yeah.
Thank you for this ramble. I'm sure if you're now listening to this for this long, you probably also hated Cleveland Fan Expo. I probably shouldn't say hate. Disliked.
Were disappointed by.
Yeah, that's probably the best way to put it.
Yeah.
So thank you for those of you who are commiserating with us. And again, if you did enjoy it and want to go back, absolutely do. But it's probably not going to be one I recommend for friends for a while until they
fix some stuff.
And I do think we're seriously considering not going back next year unless, at the very least, they fix the paneling.
Yeah.
And I would want more reassurance, especially on their website, in terms of when are you allowed into panel rooms. I would love that listed on their website because that's accessible for people with disabilities. I would also like to know that they're not clearing panel rooms because, again, both of those pieces of information are very important to people with disabilities in determining whether or not a con is going to be accessible to them. Like, just full stop. And that's for pretty much all disabilities.
Yeah. So yeah, I think we could keep talking about this for even longer, but
we're home.
We're home. We just pulled into the driveway.
So join us next week for Motor City FurCon, our first furry convention of the year, which I'm very excited about, and you're less excited about.
It'll be a thing. So yeah, thank you very much, and see you next week.
Bye.